Lord of Mysteries, The Arrival of the New Black Emperor by author Huo Yang. Chapter 651-660. In Hobert's study, he briefly told Zio about the battle. He concluded, I previously received intelligence that the Aurora Order had a total of 5 saints. We have already eliminated 4 of their saints. If they haven't replenished their forces, then the Aurora Order only has 1 saint left. But no matter whether they replenish their saint-level forces or not, this secret organization composed of madmen will surely disappear for a period of time. Thinking of the organization's purpose, Hobert felt that the true Creator Church would definitely replenish some saint-level forces. Zio smiled. Before, I never thought that I could contribute my strength to combating such an evil Beander organization. We must continue to strike the Aurora Order, Hobert said again. You must use your intelligence network to publicize tonight's operation. Portraying the Aurora Order is extremely discomfited, even begging Duke Hobert for mercy. Zio was slightly stunned. This will expose you. It's fine, Hobert smiled. I just want to provoke them. It would be best if they delivered themselves to my doorstep. Tonight's operation, Hobert didn't even wear a mask, because with his current strength, an organization like the Aurora Order had to hide from him, not the other way around. Even with the addition of the Iron-Blooded Cross Society, with the Forsake Empire's royal family and many Beander families of the Intis Republic holding the Hunter pathway, this organization was not an opponent of the Creator's forces. At least it was much worse than the Witch sect. So if they wanted to seek revenge on Hobert, they would have to weigh their options first. After Zio left, Hobert habitually reviewed tonight's battle, then entered the country of disorder to inventory the spoils of war. The biggest spoil of war was, of course, the Box of the Old Days, this Grade 0 sealed artifact. Its abilities were quite good, divided into 3 layers. The first layer could swap the internal space with a certain area in reality. Areas that entered the box would become exquisite toys, and living beings entering the box would be like wind-up dolls, their movements jerky and unable to form coherent thoughts. The second layer recorded places like the abyss and the starry sky. The holder and surrounding targets would randomly enter a certain space recorded in the second layer. The holder's only advantage was being prepared, making it easier to escape from those places, basically a mutual destruction ability. The third layer contained the pollution of the starry sky. This layer had a certain probability of opening on its own, and all creatures within a certain range would die suddenly or be contaminated. Hobert, sitting on the Iron Throne, sighed, only the first layer is safe. The ability of the third layer was actually a negative effect. Suddenly being watched from the starry sky was quite terrifying to think about. Another negative effect was that the holder might suddenly disappear. This was another negative effect that was difficult to guard against. So Hobert simply sealed it in the country of disorder, and would retrieve it when needed. Finally, it was the naming process. This time, Hobert didn't have to expend too many brain cells, because the name was ready-made, 0 to 72, Box of the Old Days. Longtail Island, Governor's Mansion. In the early morning, Hobert came to the bedroom here, and Furs was indeed still in bed. Get up quickly, I brought you a gift. Furs lay there motionless, using her actions to interpret what it meant to be unmoved. Hobert sat by the bed. You will definitely love it. Furs didn't even lift her eyes, simply covering her head with a blanket. Yesterday, Dofus and I eliminated Buddhas. Furs visibly paused, then suddenly sat up. Which Buddhas? It's the Buddhas you mentioned before, who defected from the Abraham family, Hobert replied with a smile. Do you feel instantly awake? Furs was stunned for a while longer before yawning, seemingly fully awake now. Your operation with Zio was successful. Hobert had mentioned before that he was having Zio investigate the Aurora Order, of course, a great victory. Furs leaned over and kissed Hobert. That's great. Is that all? What else? Of course, to continue, Hobert jumped onto the bed and tackled Furs. Ahaha, don't kiss my neck so hard, it will leave a mark. After a passionate interlude, Hobert held Furs as they lay on the bed. Later, I'm taking people to the air base on the Janai southern shore to prepare for bombing St. Millen. Furs warned, don't push yourself too hard. Of course not, Hobert laughed. After all, I'm just an external helper. Furs added, I need to go to Pritz Harbor to hand Buddhas's head over to my teacher. We have to split the benefits we get equally, Hobert smiled, you can't hog it all. Don't worry, it's all yours. Furs said generously. Hobert left around 9 in the morning. Furs struggled for a long time but couldn't complete the process of getting up, so she simply went back to sleep. Around 11 o'clock, Furs finally got up, changed into a long dress, put on a wide-brimmed hat, and set off for Pritz Harbor. Since this meeting was again without any prior notice, she still had to follow the previous procedure. Furs found someone to send a letter to Dorian at the Fishery Association, marking the safe code in the letter. Then they arrived one after another at a pre-arranged hotel, in a pre-arranged room. Furs waited in the room for more than 20 minutes, hiding behind the curtains, watching teacher Dorian stroll into the hotel. After knocking on the door according to the agreed-upon code, opening the door, and exchanging hand gestures to confirm the code, both of them breathed a slight sigh of relief. A while ago, Furs had discussed the matter of codes between Beyonders with Hobert. She felt that the Abraham family had done very well in this regard. But Hobert said that such codes were only useful to Zio's intelligence department. Other official Beyonders, apart from some simple codes, did not have much need for them. Because they were official Beyonders, and the official Beyonders station was not a rendezvous point, but an office. They had to be open and above board, not secretive. This thought flashed through Furs's mind, and she smiled, I'm sorry, teacher, for coming to you so suddenly again. Dorian, with his very broad shoulders, also smiled and said, every time your sudden visit brings me some surprise. As an astrologer, with very keen spirituality, Dorian had already premonitions that his student would bring him another considerable surprise this time. As you expected, Furs said, I brought Buddha's head. Who? Buddhas, Furs replied, the Buddhas you told me about before. Oh, my goodness, you actually killed Buddhas. Dorian exclaimed, sitting in the chair, his face full of disbelief. He took a few seconds to recover before saying, was this killed by Hobert again? That's right, Furs stated directly, when Hobert was striking the Aurora Order's forces, he and his companions encountered Buddhas and others. Because I had mentioned this person to Hobert before, he and his companions eliminated Buddhas. As Furs spoke, she opened the cloth bag she was carrying, revealing the already processed head. Dorian was at a loss for words for a moment. In his student's mouth, killing a mystic was as simple as crushing a chick. He looked at the head and saw the unwillingness and surprise on Buddhas's face from before his death, and was filled with emotion. After a long while, Dorian said to Furs, I don't even know how to thank Hobert. You're welcome, Furs smiled, I just wanted to do something for you. Dorian, however, laughed and said, I must thank you, otherwise my companions will suspect that you have other motives. He thought for a moment before saying, I've seen descriptions of your recent situation in the newspaper. I know you're not short of money now, and you're very powerful. Hobert can also provide you with excellent extraordinary resources. However, I still have some information about our pathway here, which should be very useful to you. How about this? After you advance, I will give you the Traveler and Mystic potion formulas, and I will also help you prepare the ritual for advancing to Mystic. I think Hobert should have the extraordinary characteristics for Traveler and Mystic, so I will provide all the auxiliary materials for these two advancements. Furs was about to refuse, but seeing Dorian's firm expression, she could only say, thank you, teacher. She sighed inwardly, the things teacher gives me, Hobert can't use them, can he? How should I share them with him? Dorian sighed again and said, the newspaper a few days ago said that Hobert was ennobled as a duke and could even establish a country in the South Continent. Is that true? It's true, Furs said, I even went to his new territory to take a look. It's very vast, but the level of civilization isn't high. Such a young and promising young man is truly rare, Dorian sighed. Speaking of which, we only met at your wedding and haven't had a good chat yet. Please help me tell him that I wish to express my gratitude in person. Furs, who now had considerable political awareness, realized that teacher Dorian must have sensed Hobert's unusual background and wanted to understand him more deeply. No problem, Furs smiled. In a blink of an eye, it was October 16th. A few days ago, the Forsake Empire had just experienced a heavy snowfall, but after the cold snap passed, the temperature rose again, and the heavy snow had just begun to melt. In the early morning, Hobert, in the airship command room, saw a vast expanse of white on the ground and felt the severe cold of this northern country. Respected God blessed, the sun is about to rise, and we are about to enter a densely populated area ahead, reminded Malva, the iron-blooded knight, from the Tony family. Hobert smiled. I said, this battle will be entirely under your command. As he spoke, he simply sat by the window, as if continuing to admire the scenery outside. Malva was Raymond's chosen candidate for promotion to war bishop. If the sneak attack on St. Milan could succeed, it would definitely fulfill the promotion ritual. After several days of planning, this fleet of 24 airships departed yesterday in the early hours of the morning, first heading west, bypassing the battlefield on the Janai southern shore. Then, all the lights on the airships were turned off, and they crossed the Intersea in complete darkness. After sailing through the darkness for an entire night, they finally entered the Fursak Empire silently. The airship fleet began to advance northeast, heading straight for St. Milan. Winter in the Fursak Empire, especially when the ice and snow melt and the temperature slightly warms up, is also a season prone to heavy fog. Although not as severe as the fog in Backland, it could still provide excellent cover for the airship fleet before the sun rose. Now the sun was about to rise, and there was still about an hour's journey to St. Milan, especially near St. Milan, where the population became dense, making it easy to be discovered at this time. However, Malva had already discussed this issue with Hobert. Seeing that Hobert had completely handed over the command position to him, he cleared his throat and ordered, "Start praying." The orderly immediately used signal lamps to transmit the order to each airship. For a time, on every airship, people prayed to the Creator. These people were basically the Beyonders of the Tony family, as well as the prayer members, designated by Malva. The soldiers piloting the airships were indifferent. They were well aware that this mission was a suicide mission and had long been mentally prepared for death. At this moment, their hearts were very calm, as they knew where the end of their lives lay. Hobert appeared to be looking out the window, but in fact, he had already entered the country of disorder. Based on the expanding stars in the pool, he projected a certain amount of power into the real world, altering the appearance of the airship fleet. From the ground, no airship fleet could be seen, only a cloud drifting north. Hobert could distortion the fleet's position to make them reach the designated location as quickly as possible, but that would easily alert the enemy. If the Fursak Empire's royal family controlled the arbitrator pathway, Hobert would never agree to participate in such a sneak attack mission. Because high-sequence Beyonders of this pathway could establish subtle connections with their territory, making it easier for them to detect sneak attacks. While high-sequence Beyonders of the Hunter pathway possessed various practical abilities on the battlefield and could easily dominate wars, they lacked corresponding connections with their territories. Additionally, the 24 airship fleet was a small target, making it difficult for them to be discovered. Furthermore, according to the intelligence Hobert received, the angels of the Fursak Empire's royal family were currently overseeing the battle on the Janai southern shore, while the angels of the War God Church were confronting the angels of the Church of the Night Goddess in the Ananda Mountains. This created a gap in St. Milan's defenses. At least until the bombing, this airship fleet would be very difficult to detect. Because the Creator's status was very high, under his alteration, demigod-level Beyonders would only detect something amiss at a relatively close distance. If they were still far from St. Milan and a demigod happened to fly through the sky not far from the airship fleet or pass by on the road below the fleet due to an urgent matter, that would simply be Hobert and their bad luck. The sun appeared on the horizon, and its light shone on the earth, quickly dispelling the mist. Hobert saw smoke rising from the Fursak Empire's villages, signaling the start of a day's labor. The Fursak Empire generally could only produce one crop per year. After harvesting in August and September, the severe winter would soon follow. Before the heavy snow sealed the mountains, enough firewood had to be chopped, as they would rely on it for warmth throughout the winter. In previous years, October had already entered a period of rest for the people. But this year was different. The war had begun, and the young people in the villages had been conscripted into the army during the summer for military training. Now, they were all on the battlefields of the Janai southern shore in the Ananda Mountains. The middle-aged people, children, and elderly in the villages all had to go to workshops in the towns to produce military products. The entire country would continue to operate through this harsh winter. This made Hobert suddenly recall a theory about atomic peace. That theory roughly stated that with nuclear bombs, it wasn't that people feared destroying the entire world, which prevented global wars. Rather, the decision-makers who planned wars and the capitalists who hoped to profit from war, like the children of farmers and workers sent to the battlefield, could easily die from nuclear weapons, even more easily than soldiers on the front lines. That's why global wars couldn't break out. Hobert took a deep breath, looking at the smoke-filled countryside below him. Originally, I thought that deities were the nuclear deterrent of this world, but now it seems there's still a considerable difference between the two. Most of the time, deities could deter each other, but sometimes, they were the biggest destabilizing factor. As the sun gradually rose, visibility became better and better. When the mist completely dissipated, St. Milan could be clearly seen through binoculars. Malva observed carefully for a moment and then began to order the airship fleet to make its final adjustments to its flight direction. Fearing that the flashing lights would be detected by the enemy, communication between the airships was done by flag signals. Everyone held their breath, not daring to speak too loudly. The palms of Malva and the other commanders were already covered in sweat, not only from nervousness but also from excitement. The bombing target was right before their eyes, and getting closer and closer. They could already clearly see carriages going in and out of the factories and workers moving goods. At this moment, their urgency reached its peak. They desperately wished to appear over the bombing target in the next second. Suddenly, a fiery serpent shot up from the ground, sweeping towards the airship fleet. Malva loudly commanded, "Block the flame attack." The demigod of the lawyer pathway from the Tony family, who had come to assist with the promotion, distortioned the fiery serpent backward, and it did not hit the airship. They were still discovered. This also meant that the surprise attack had begun. Malva ordered, "Ring the electric bell, no more hiding, full speed ahead. Prepare to drop bombs. If unfortunately hit, drop all carried bombs before crashing." The officers of the other airships could hear Malva's orders very clearly. This was a very practical ability of a hunter, pathway demigod. Within a certain range, they could transmit orders to their subordinates without obstruction. Ding-a-ling. The electric bells of all 24 airships were rung almost simultaneously, and all officers and soldiers of the entire fleet took their positions. The lookouts had already opened their observation windows and binoculars, ready to guide the bombing at any moment. Whoosh! On the ground, a long air raid siren wailed, and amidst loud curses directed at the ancestors of the ruined people, the ground air defense units reacted first, running to transport ammunition and prepare to retaliate with anti-aircraft machine guns. But they did not immediately spot the target, because at this point, from the ground, the airship fleet still appeared as clouds. Even the demigod who sensed something amiss was unsure what was contained within that cloud, only guessing it was something like an airship or hot air balloon. At the same time, that demigod felt that the power forming the cloud was very high level, so he did not dare to continue attacking, but instead warned the air defense units while praying to his own angel. In the command room, after issuing a series of orders, Malva said to Hobert, "Please help us reach the top of the target as quickly as possible." Hobert nodded, first amplifying the airship fleet's speed, then using continuous distortion, he reached the top of the St. Milan industrial area in 3 or 4 seconds. If the Creator had intervened, the time to enter St. Milan might have been even faster. But that would likely attract the attention of the war god, and according to previous agreements among the deities, he might directly descend. The Creator was just an empty facade. Deceiving angels was fine, but in front of a deity, it might be immediately exposed. To prevent the situation from becoming uncontrollable at the outset, Hobert still chose to act himself. On the ground, the soldiers of the air defense unit saw more than 20 airships, like arrows released from a bowstring, burst out of the clouds and instantly entered the industrial area. After 1 or 2 seconds, under the loud commands of their officers, everyone seemed to snap back to reality, turning their anti-aircraft machine guns and firing into the sky. The Beyonders on the airships either distortion bullets that resembled tongues of fire or summoned firewalls to block the bullets. But they could still only defend against a portion of the attacks. Some bullets still swept towards the airships, piercing their wooden structures. Several unfortunate soldiers on the airships who were hit had their limbs torn off by anti-aircraft bullets, and blood splattered on the floor. Drop bombs. Malva no longer cared if the position was suitable or not and immediately ordered, don't aim, drop bombs immediately, drop all the bombs. Streaks of flame rushed from the ground into the sky, the enemy's demigods began their attack. 5 airships were hit by flames and caught fire, then exploded, plummeting rapidly towards the ground, without even dropping a single bomb. The remaining airships quickly dropped their bombs. To drop them quickly, some Beyonders even simply threw out the bomb bays all at once, scattering them like falling flowers onto the ground. The flames on the ground began to sweep the falling bombs, and most of them exploded in midair. Boom! As Hobert distortioned the positions of 3 bombs, causing them to explode on the streets of St. Milan. Malva immediately shouted, "Retreat, full-speed retreat. We have achieved victory." As long as 1 bomb was detonated on the ground in St. Milan, the objective of this raid would be achieved. So Malva ordered, immediate retreat. Some airships hadn't dropped all their bombs yet, so they turned while still dropping bombs. The retreat route had also been planned long ago, retreating from the direction of the slum, where there were not many anti-aircraft defenses. Hobert once again amplified the flight speed of the airship fleet. The airships experienced violent shaking. In their initial design, to reduce weight, most of the airship's structure was made of wood and alloy, and going any faster would cause them to disintegrate. Soon, the airship fleet exceeded the range of the anti-aircraft machine guns, but everyone dared not be careless, because the Beyonders stationed in St. Milan were still closely pursuing them, and battles between Beyonders were constantly occurring between the sky and the ground. Following that, Hobert continued to use the distortion ability to make the airships leave the urban area as quickly as possible. Just then, fireballs, like meteors, broke through the clouds and attacked the airship fleet. Their speed was extremely fast, and Hobert and the other demigods only had time to block some of them. Boom! Explosions continuously rang out in the sky. Most airships were penetrated from top to bottom, and the large airbags of the airships deflated like punctured balloons, the hydrogen inside catching fire and exploding before it could all escape, falling rapidly like ignited leaves. After passing through the airbags, these meteors accurately hit the gondolas, and the officers, soldiers, and Beyonders inside were basically killed instantly, with no time for rescue. Malva and the other commanders fell silent. In an instant, only 8 airships remained in the airship fleet. Hobert knew that this was the Forsac Empire's angels returning to reinforce. At this point, disregarding any agreements between the gods, Hobert immediately entered the spiritual world, appearing in a forest in southern St. Milan. According to the previous agreement, Malva saw Hobert leave and immediately ordered, "Pray." Members of the Tony family immediately began to pray, while the ruin officers and soldiers on the airships had completely given up on escaping, instead using the airship's machine guns to attack the ground. Some soldiers even laughed wildly, firing pistols and rifles aimlessly behind them. Today they had done something incredibly crazy, avenging the enemy's bombing of Backland. They knew their mission was complete. Although many of them did not know about Beyonders, nor did they quite understand what those fireballs and fire snakes from the ground were, they all knew that they definitely wouldn't be able to return. This was the enemy's heartland, and they only had 8 airships left, making it impossible to escape the pursuit and the interception by enemy airships stationed in the Intersea. For this operation, they had not even brought much fuel for the return journey in order to make the airships lighter. So the officers and soldiers had completely given up, preparing to die in the next second. Hobert, who appeared in the forest, instantly built a spiritual wall, entered the country of disorder, picked up the 0 to 72 doomsday box from the armrest, opened the first layer, and projected his power onto the pulsating stars in the pool. At this time, the second round of attacks from the Forsac Empire's angels began. This time, the fireballs were even denser than in the previous round, and the demigods' abilities could not protect the airships. Just as they were extremely nervous, wondering if the Creator would abandon them, a majestic figure sitting amidst a cluster of sharp swords suddenly appeared in midair. Around him, solidified dark light was extremely sacred, yet it exuded an aura that made people dare not look directly at him. He held a silver-black jewelry box, and after opening the first layer, the 8 airships immediately disappeared. The extremely fast fireballs collided with each other, exploding in midair without hitting any targets. Immediately, that majestic figure instantly disappeared. The industrial area of St. Milan. Vasily, the director of the Berkeley Intelligence Bureau, sat in a carriage, watching firefighters and workers putting out the fire. Currently, the fire had been brought under control, and search and rescue operations had begun, but the public was still somewhat panicked, with many people on the streets staring blankly at the recently bombed factory, momentarily at a loss. In addition, faint cries could be heard. Those were the sounds of people who had lost loved ones in the bombing. Vasily, with his high nose bridge and light yellow hair, had a stern expression. No one had expected Ruin to carry out an air raid on St. Milan, because theoretically, their air power was all tied up. An air raid with only 20-something airships was quite ridiculous. After all, that amount of bomb load could not possibly cause much loss to the Fursak Empire. But what was even more ridiculous was that the Fursak Empire actually let 8 of those 20-something airships escape. This result was very difficult to accept, but what was even more difficult to accept was that a godlike existence covered their departure. That was not William I, nor was it any deity Vasily was familiar with. Although there was no definitive intelligence yet, Vasily already had a suspicion that should be the creator. Last year, when the Bach family and the Rose School had their extraordinary war, Vasily had obtained intelligence about the creator. But what he hadn't expected was that the creator would join the war so quickly. At this moment, an intelligence officer ran over quickly and handed Vasily the newly compiled statistics. Vasily glanced at it, closed the carriage window, pulled the curtains, and disappeared from the carriage. 2 seconds later, he appeared in a manor in the suburbs of St. Milan, where there was a landmark building, a tall stone tower. It is said that this stone tower has a history of over 1,000 years, looking very rough, and this stone tower does not taper at the top, but rather has a circular, attic-like structure at its summit. Vasily's destination was there. After being questioned by the guards at the base of the tower, he quickly ascended the stairs, and in the luxurious room at the very top, he met the middle-aged man wearing traditional Fursak Empire attire. The middle-aged man's light yellow beard was meticulously groomed, and his hair was not very long, but neither was it the short hair popular now, but rather shoulder-length hair, popular in ancient times. If a historian were to see this middle-aged man, they would certainly exclaim, "He looks too much like His Majesty Alexei, the founder of the Fursak Empire." In fact, this was precisely the Fursak Empire's first emperor, Alexei Einhorn. When the war began, the emperor in Sadalak Palace was more like a logistics minister, providing various logistical supplies to the front lines, keeping the empire running normally. This Majesty Alexei was the supreme decision-maker for military operations. Vasily knelt on one knee. "Your Majesty, the lost statistics from this air raid have been compiled." Alexei looked out the window at the distant St. Milan urban area. "How many factories will cease production?" "Only 2, Vasily reported. "Neither of them are too important, and it was the fire after the bombing that burned some important machinery, forcing them to stop production. They can resume production in 20 days at most." In addition, 5 other factories suffered varying degrees of damage, but the impact was not significant. According to current statistics, 9 people died in this attack, and dozens were injured. Alexei suddenly smiled. "A Ruin airship must have a dozen or so officers and soldiers, right?" Vasily replied. "Usually around 20 people." At this point, both of them fell silent, because they also knew that as long as one bomb fell on St. Milan, Ruin's raid would be considered a victory in this battle, and the Ruin Air Force soldiers who died over St. Milan were also very valuable. Just as Vasily was about to say something, Alexei's gaze suddenly sharpened. "This performance still has a curtain call." Vasily was first startled, then his spirituality also seemed to sense something, and he looked towards the midair over St. Milan. Only to see a figure suddenly appear in midair. He was dressed in knight's attire, handsome, and smilingly bowed slightly towards them. It truly was like an actor's curtain call after a performance. Intelligence Director Vasily immediately recognized him. "Hobert. Ruin's new Duke Hobert." Then he looked at Alexei. "Your Majesty, that is not his true body," Alexei said coldly. At this moment, several blazing white spears were fired from the ground into the air. The instant they touched Hobert, with a crash, he turned into a mirror. Vasily clenched his fists tightly, gritting his teeth and saying, "This fellow is too arrogant. Your Majesty, this is a provocation." Alexei, however, said, "I heard that during the extraordinary war that happened in the South Kholson region before, an angel of the witch sect fell. Vasily took a deep breath before saying, "According to the intelligence we received, that is correct." Alexei hummed. It seems that Angel became a grade 0 sealed artifact. Then he said, "Contact Jonas, and have him get in touch with the Bach family." Jonas was a governor of the Fursak Empire in the South Continent, controlling General Anthony's territory. As for the Bach family, they initially cooperated with General Anthony and Jonas, participating in the management of extraordinary affairs in part of General Anthony's territory. Vasily also calmed down. "Are we to test whether the creator has already been bought by the Ruin royal family?" "They have definitely been bought. Didn't you report that this duke named Hobert obtained the privilege to establish a country in the South Continent?" Alexei said, "What we need to test is whether the creator is satisfied with such a bribe. Whether as an emperor or a conqueror, he rarely experienced emotions like anger. He had always been very calm, unlike Vasily who had to try hard to control his anger." Alexei sighed. "We no longer have the strength to go to war with the creator's forces. It's best to stabilize them before too intense a conflict breaks out." Somewhere over the Janai southern shore, the space in midair suddenly became illusory, and Hobert stepped out of the spiritual world, temporarily suspending himself in midair by altering gravity. Just now, he had used the curtain call, or rather, the provocation, of the 0 to 71 disaster porcelain doll, which led to a significant further digestion of his potion. This made Hobert smile. "It seems that the Fursak Empire's first emperor saw my performance." Not only Alexei, but a large number of Beyonders and ordinary citizens saw Hobert's arrogant provocation. Most Beyonders were very angry, believing Hobert was too arrogant. However, most of the populace was very afraid, even falling into a certain degree of panic. Regardless of the reaction, for Hobert, it was the feedback he greatly needed. Taking a deep breath, Hobert prayed to himself, entering the country of disorder, through his stars, pouring power into the real world, opening the 0 to 72 doomsday box, and releasing the 8 airships. These 8 airships had also suffered some damage, with many ropes broken, and they looked somewhat askew when flying. Hobert withdrew the power of the creator, returned to the real world, and used the ability of distortion to return to the command room. At this time, the people in the command room were a bit dazed. They hadn't felt much just now, but in a moment of distraction, they had arrived in an unfamiliar airspace. St. Milan was gone, the fire from the anti-aircraft machine guns was gone, the flames rising from the ground were gone, and the terrifyingly roaring meteors that were meant to harvest lives were gone. Hobert drew a horizontal rectangle on his chest, then a vertical line, "Praise the Creator." Malva and the others then came to their senses and followed Hobert in making the gesture representing the Creator, "Praise the Creator." In their opinion, their escape from danger this time was entirely due to the divine power displayed by the Creator. What they didn't know, however, was that the Creator did not possess such great power. 10 days ago, it was only after severely wounding the Aurora Order that he gained such power. At this moment, Locker, the airship officer, came over and asked, "Officers, what kind of deity is the Creator you just praised?" At this time, the officers and soldiers also realized that they were still alive. For a moment, some wept with joy, some were utterly bewildered, and others, like Locker, had already understood that they had been saved by the deity worshipped by these demigods and Sequence 5 Beyonders. This was also their first time experiencing the great power of a deity. So Hobert immediately transformed into a charlatan and began preaching. The Lord awakened from chaos and saw that the order in the human world was so unbearable. Morality was no longer the standard for judging whether a person was good, but money was. Violence permeated every corner of this world and was whitewashed by deities and rule. Wicked villains lived good lives, while truly loving and kind people toiled all day, with no time to enjoy life at all. He continued, "So the Lord sighed. Humans in the 5th epoch are even more miserable than in the 2nd epoch. At least in the 2nd epoch, humans rarely killed or deceived each other. Therefore, the Lord intends to overthrow the existing order and establish a new order for the human world." Malva and the others also heard the principles advocated by the Creator for the first time. They memorized them diligently, appearing very devout. After hearing this principle and some of the Creator's help to the common people, Locker and the other officers naturally became shallow believers of the Creator and said they would go to Longtail Island to worship. Hobert said, "My lord has no churches, only subjects. However, you are welcome to visit Longtail Island and witness the changes the Creator's principles will bring to the world." After talking with a few officers for a while, under Hobert's care, Malva finally took the potion. The bombing of St. Millen was a very successful promotion ritual, allowing Malva to complete his promotion very smoothly. This made Hobert sigh. This pathway requires war to advance quickly and digest the potion quickly. Extra. Rune Air Force attacks St. Millen. That evening, the streets and alleys of Ruin were filled with the cries of newsboys shouting, "Extra." Passers-by stopped to buy newspapers, and a thick stack of them was quickly bought up. Leonard, who had just gotten off the public carriage, also bought a newspaper. He sighed, the Rune Air Force must have suffered heavy losses this time. But when he saw the newspaper, he was completely stunned. Only 24 airships went, and 8 returned. How did the military do it? But when he saw the commanders of this battle mentioned later, Leonard instantly understood. According to the newspaper, there were 3 commanders for this air raid. Duke Hobert was the chief planner, Lord Malva was the overall commander, and Major General Locker was the deputy commander. In Leonard's opinion, this chief planner was crucial. The Creator must have intervened to help them escape St. Millen, otherwise, with only 24 airships, there would have been no possibility of returning. At this moment, Leonard realized, does the Creator support Ruin? At this moment, Sodalak Palace was holding a grand celebratory ball. The 3 protagonists of this ball were Hobert, Malva, and Locker. Hobert was accustomed to such social engagements and could respond appropriately to the nobles, flattery or inquiries. Occasionally, he would also show his humility, saying that he had no merit in this battle and that it was all due to the planning of the royal family and the military. For a time, the atmosphere of the party was joyful, with endless praise for Hobert, who had achieved such great merit yet remained so humble. However, in Hobert's view, this was merely after-sales service. Not long after returning to the Ruin Kingdom, Hobert received news from Todd that the Rune royal family had agreed to support 13 major items and 22 minor items of technology that Hobert had previously proposed. Initially, Hobert had proposed support for 15 major items and 22 minor items. In Hobert's previous negotiations with Alice, even with Alice's leniency, 1/3 of the technical support was cut. At the time, Hobert thought that price was quite good, as it was impossible to drain Ruin's centuries of technological accumulation all at once. But after this surprise attack, except for the ship and airship technology that Hobert requested, all other technologies were given. After a brief thought, Hobert understood that the Ruin Kingdom probably hadn't expected the Creator to intervene in such a battle. Theoretically, for deities, they wouldn't care about the lives of a few demigod subordinates. Let alone deities, even William I didn't intend to help the officers on those 24 airships escape. It wasn't that they were cruel, but at their level, they simply wouldn't care about such things. However, the Creator's reaction exceeded their expectations, and it was also rumored that Malva had taken the opportunity to be promoted to War Bishop. The key is that once the Creator intervened, the nature of the situation changed. Firstly, this was divine assistance, which was inherently priceless. Secondly, this was tantamount to the Creator taking a side. In William I's view, the Creator was indicating his support for the Ruin Kingdom. The last reason was that 8 airships returned, making Ruin's victory even more complete. Although William I and others felt that the Creator's intervention at the very beginning of the war was making a mountain out of a molehill, the respect due still had to be given. So the Rune royal family decided to pay for more technology, but on the condition that Hobert cooperate with the royal family in publicizing this victory and in having the South Balam Duchy declare war on the Forsake Empire's colonial army in the South Continent. As the war intensified, Ruin currently needed a large number of soldiers. They planned to buy the teleportation array blueprints from Hobert and build their own teleportation arrays between the North-South continent to transfer colonial soldiers to participate in the war. Then there needed to be a force to tie down the Forsake Empire's colonial army in the southern part of the South Continent, and the South Balam Duchy was the perfect choice. Therefore, after Hobert returned to Backland, he first began a second round of negotiations with the royal family. Only after the terms were agreed upon did Hobert cooperate so well at the ball. Otherwise, he would have long since returned to the South Balam Duchy to deal with the affairs of the Earth King and generals there, having no time to chat idly with these nobles. As for Malva and Locker, they only became a lord and a major general after their return. Before this, one had never interacted with nobles, and the other was still a major yesterday. Suddenly being in such an occasion made them a bit flustered. Throughout the ball, Hobert was essentially the one socializing with the nobles. Hobert had been so busy lately that Audrey was only able to speak a few words to him at today's ball. I can only say that your battle was a miracle. Hobert noticed that Audrey's praise was a bit forced. He knew that Audrey didn't really want him to get involved in this war. He smiled and said, "In a couple of days, I'll take you to the South Balam Duchy for a visit." Audrey then genuinely said with joy, "Good." She had long wanted to visit the South Balam Duchy, but Hobert had never extended an invitation, and she found it difficult to ask directly. For the next 2 days, Hobert stayed in Backland. After attending multiple interviews and social engagements, this round of propaganda by the Rune royal family finally ended. It must be said that this surprise attack greatly boosted the morale of the frontline soldiers. It is said that the 2 battle lines against the Forsake Empire have now stabilized. The newspaper also said that the Forsake Empire's offensive momentum had been stopped and that the war would now enter a stalemate. Hobert completed the after-sales service, and, as agreed, used travel to bring Audrey to Anjou, the capital of the South Balam Duchy. Now, outside Anjou city, many colorful tents of various sizes had been set up. Those were the residences of the Earth King and generals. Now, all the proxies previously supported by Ruin in the South Balam Duchy had arrived and were awaiting an audience with Duke Hobert. Audrey glanced from the city wall. "I didn't expect there to be such an exquisite city." "You can just say it's small," Hobert laughed. "After a while, once the land reform in the duchy is completed, these 4 city walls will be torn down for extensive expansion work." Descending from the city wall, Hobert introduced Audrey to some of the local customs of the South Continent and strolled to the command post. Conrad and Donna and the others knew Hobert was coming today and had been waiting there, ready to hold a meeting with Hobert to discuss some matters. They were all stunned when they saw Audrey next to Hobert. At this time, there were many witches in Anjou city, but compared to Audrey, they were still slightly inferior. The key was that Audrey was holding Hobert's arm, and the two looked very intimate. It wasn't until Donna naturally called out, "Sister-in-law," that everyone reacted and generally understood what was going on. Hobert nodded with satisfaction. "Donna must get an extra chicken drumstick for dinner." Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Duke Hobert's intention in bringing Audrey was very clear. Longtail Island and South Colson were Furza's private domain, and the entire Earl's Light would be handed over to Audrey to manage in the future. However, the South Balam Duchy was different. It was definitely going to become a kingdom in the future, his absolute base. Duke Hobert wanted Conrad and his other trusted aides to know that this kingdom would have 2 queens in the future. He knew that Conrad and others from South Colson would certainly lean more towards Furs, but it was fine as long as they did not object to Audrey becoming another queen. Duke Hobert introduced these high-ranking officials of the duchy to Audrey one by one, and Audrey's responses were graceful and poised, thanks to her aristocratic education from a young age. She was very happy to attend such a meeting, which meant that Duke Hobert was allowing her to join the core group of the South Balam Duchy. After everyone was seated in the war room, the meeting officially began. Audrey sat beside Duke Hobert, but she was very clear that she was still an observer at this point and just needed to listen carefully. The first topic discussed at this meeting was the reception of the Saint Nose Basin. The situation here was different from Longtail Island. The entire basin was basically farms owned by Runes, who had bought the land from the governor's mansion back then, meaning they were the legal owners of these lands. The method of colonization in this basin was also different from that of Longtail Island. Most of the farmers were Rune immigrants, including fugitives, former pirates, and adventurers. Of course, most of them were poor people from Ruin who couldn't make a living in that country, so they came here, bought a large piece of land for a very low price, and lived a nearly isolated life, freely grazing or growing crops. So, Conrad and the others' first question was, should these lands be nationalized? After all, theoretically, these lands were all legal, and most farmers were law-abiding and very enthusiastic, so forcibly reclaiming them seemed a bit inappropriate. Duke Hobert said, the process of their purchase was legal, but have you investigated where the St. Nosey governor's mansion got its land from? Conrad replied, yes, they seized it from the local aborigines, driving them further south, to colder places. It's more than just driving them away, Duke Hobert had investigated earlier. After the runes arrived here, they bought the aborigines, heads at a price of 1 sul per head, carrying out a 2-month slaughter. Those aborigines who fled further south were lucky, because they not only escaped the slaughter but also survived the infectious diseases brought by the runes. Audrey was a little surprised internally. She tried to tell herself, this is what a colony is. Duke Hobert then said, then the governor's mansion established here sold the entire basin to the subsequent immigrants at a price of 1 sul per mu of land. He stated solemnly, these lands were originally seized, and they cannot become legal just because they passed through the governor's mansion. Therefore, nationalizing them is legally sound. As for the process of recovery, we must pay attention to methods and approaches, and not be as barbaric and crude as the previous invaders. Everyone looked at Duke Hobert, knowing that the Duke already had a plan. First, reclaiming the land and redistributing it uniformly, this must be completed. Duke Hobert emphasized again, I went to see it before, such good land, many places are used for grazing, which is a huge waste. Then he began to elaborate on the detailed deployment. The government can try to communicate with the local residents, and the Duchy government can lease their land to settle a large number of backland vagrants. We can offer farmers some opportunities to hold public office, as we have a huge shortage of grassroots civil servants. As long as they are willing to respond to the call, we will carefully cultivate them, let them visit our other territories, and in the future, serve as grassroots officials in other bangs and regions. At that time, we will inform them of some rigid regulations of the Duchy. Anyone serving as a civil servant must be a citizen of the South LotM Duchy, and as long as they are a citizen, they cannot own land beyond the allocated quota. The runes who immigrated to the South Continent are basically very poor people, and most of them will not miss the opportunity to become civil servants. This way, most of the land can be nationalized. Everyone in the room was stunned. This operation neither violated principles nor contradicted legality. The key was that these immigrants also benefited. Everyone present knew that the Creator's influence was currently in its pioneering stage, and grassroots officials would soon become mid-level officials. It should be noted that among the 15 village chiefs Duke Hobert first appointed in the Jeffrey territory, those who were willing to advance have now become deputy mayors. Some who were unwilling to leave South Colson have also reached the level of town mayor or deputy town mayor. Especially Conrad, who was the town mayor at the time, is now the prime minister of the South LotM Duchy. Such a high position, Conrad couldn't even imagine 2 years ago. Looking at the entire North Continent, there was no such fast promotion channel. So Duke Hobert was exchanging political interests for land, which was very cost-effective for both parties. Local residents gained channels for political participation, and the government gained a large reserve of grassroots cadres. The people living here are immigrants, not natives. Besides being very proficient in rune language, they basically understand the local language, making them very suitable for grassroots work. The only thing lacking might be their low cultural level, or even no culture at all. Their literacy skills need to be cultivated. In this regard, Duke Hobert's team already has considerable mature experience. They can first cultivate the literacy and arithmetic skills necessary for the job, and then continue learning while working after starting the job. After all, as a village chief initially, one doesn't need knowledge of grammar and such. They only need to provide accurate data to the town government and clearly convey the town government's policies. As for those who are unwilling to lease their land to us and become civil servants, Duke Hobert continued, we will restrict them with citizen identity. Without citizen identity, they cannot build water conservancy facilities on their land. They have to pay purchase tax and customs duties when buying daily necessities, and their children cannot attend school, and so on. If they change their minds, they can still have the opportunity to become civil servants after becoming citizens. But if they persist, we will just have to isolate them. Conrad nodded, I will quickly draft a plan. Duke Hobert then asked, how many people can the entire street Nosey Basin accommodate? Conrad replied, initially estimated to be between 700,000 and 800,000 people. That many. Duke Hobert was stunned. He quickly flipped through the information Conrad submitted and found the population information. Currently, the entire basin only had about 20,000 people. In Duke Hobert's view, this was truly a waste of resources. Audrey, who was beside him, also realized that if the development of this basin was completed, Backland would not have vagrants for a long time. She sincerely hoped that Duke Hobert's policy could be implemented as soon as possible. After the first issue was discussed, Donna brought up another topic: how to prevent attacks on the St. Nosé Basin from the Aborigines in the south, and what policies should be adopted for the rule of areas like Milhe Bang. The St. Nosé Basin is surrounded by mountains or hills in the east, north, and west, but only the south is semi-open, with only some gentle slopes, where there are swamps, grasslands, and forests. In the past, the Aborigines of the St. Nosé Basin, after crossing these swamps and fleeing further south to settle there, often returned to harass the immigrants in the St. Nosé region. After all, in their view, these lands were previously theirs, but were seized by a group of people from the North Continent. The soldiers stationed in Anjou before were not to guard against enemies from other countries, but to combat the Aborigines. And the situations in Milhe Bang, South Haiti State, and Barana Bang are different from that of the St. Nosé region. Some of these places have rich resources like forests and minerals, while others are at the southern end of the Haiti grassland, with good arable land and conditions for developing animal husbandry. Therefore, Ruin adopted a proxy rule here. For example, some Ruin companies provided technology, and local Earth Kings or generals provided slaves to jointly develop resources like iron and copper mines. In addition, Ruin would dump its industrial products in these places, continuously plundering them economically. Regarding this issue, Duke Hobert, seeing that everyone's discussion was not getting to the point, directly said, "Everyone, when looking at problems, you must be good at finding the fundamental contradiction of the problem. Let's first talk about the issue of the Aborigines. The fundamental contradiction of this issue is that after the original Aborigines of the St. Nosé region fled further south, they also clashed with the Aborigines there. After all, the carrying capacity of a piece of land is limited, and if a group of people suddenly appear on a piece of land, it will certainly cause tension in living resources. They live in hardship, so of course they will come back to snatch some things to make a living." Everyone slowly nodded. That was indeed the case. Donna asked, "Can we let them return and become citizens here, continuing to live on the land of their ancestors?" "This method seems like delayed justice, but it's not just a good idea," Duke Hobert said. "If they return, it might be even more difficult to nationalize the land, as legally, they have inheritance rights to these lands." Everyone fell into deep thought. This was indeed a major problem that had to be prevented. Moreover, everyone present had relatively rich experience in governance, and of course, they knew that sometimes, justice and morality were what make things worse. Duke Hobert let everyone think for a while before smiling. "Aren't there grasslands, swamps, and forests in the south? Donna, go discuss with Archbishop Simpson and ask him to send a bishop who is good at raising fish, cattle, and sheep, and good at cultivating economic forests, to preach. Create some employment opportunities in the animal husbandry industry in the southern region. We can also provide technology and let the Aborigines contribute labor for cooperation. As for the specific operation, you can handle it according to the actual situation. In short, if a group of Aborigines can be supported there, and they can obtain food and gold pounds through labor, who would still be willing to risk their lives to rob?" Duke Hobert paused here and then said to Donna, "If the Aborigines are very distrustful of us, then let Audrey accompany you to persuade them. This will be more effective and faster. Currently, those Aborigines and the Runes are almost sworn enemies. The Aborigines will certainly think that the promises of the South Balam Duchy are a trap. It will take a long time of persuasion and a long period of maintaining favorable policies towards them before the Aborigines can gradually trust the South Balam Duchy government. For Duke Hobert, why bother with problems that can be solved with extraordinary power?" Audrey was slightly stunned at first, then smiled at Donna. "I am very good at persuading others." Donna smiled back, "I will ask for your help at an appropriate time." For example, when sister-in-law Furs is not in Anjou. Donna then said to Duke Hobert, the only problem now is that those swamps, grasslands, etc. in the south do not belong to the territory of South Balam. Legally speaking, that's not the territory of the Rune Kingdom, Duke Hobert said with a smile. I've looked into it before, that's the domain of a local Byron Empire noble. It's just that the East Balam Company has many special privileges there, but because it's too far from the North Continent, the Rune Kingdom hasn't invested much, and the colonial army has no intention of developing it into a direct colony. Then this matter is easy to handle. No one stipulates that the South Balam Duchy cannot expand externally. If that Byron Empire noble has an opinion, then I don't mind expanding the territory to the southernmost tip of the South Continent. Everyone showed a playful smile. One was a Rune noble who came here to establish a country with the world's most advanced technology, and the other was a Byron Empire noble who had long lost contact with the Byron Empire. After occupying those swamps and grasslands, it's estimated that the Byron Empire noble wouldn't even dare to let out a fart. Duke Hobert continued, as for the other bangs, I plan to establish an outer cabinet, and keep all these Earth King and generals in Anjou City. If they are willing to support the policies of the South Balam Duchy and hand over the ownership and ruling rights of their land, then after a period of observation, we can consider giving them a substantive position. If they don't agree with our policies, then that's CL's business. That is to say, they would be forcibly taken over. Everyone understood Duke Hobert's unspoken meaning, don't be polite to these Earth King and generals. After he set the policy, Donna and the others had a guiding ideology. Thus, the meeting came to its last agenda item. Seal discovered that the Highland Kingdom in the northwest, upon learning that the Rune colonial army had withdrawn and someone was establishing a duchy here, seemed to think there was an opportunity and was contacting the Earth King and generals, seemingly with ulterior motives. Duke Hobert pondered for a moment before saying, the South Continent is their territory after all. They should have already learned through some channels that I am establishing a country here, and they also know my relationship with the Bach family. He paused and said, just pretend not to know. As long as they don't cause trouble in the Saint Nosé Basin area, leave them be for now. If they could collude with the local Earth King, that would be even better. At the end of the meeting, Duke Hobert said, tomorrow, the news of the South Balam Duchy declaring war on the Forsake Empire will be published in major newspapers in Backland. Don't be misled by this information. Continue to develop as usual. First, establish effective rule, then talk about external warfare. Everyone boomed, yes. The meeting ended, and Duke Hobert took Audrey to look around, but because the surroundings were all Rune immigrants, there was nothing distinctive except for some dilapidated temples left by the indigenous people. The two simply walked around and returned to Anjou. Today's lunch was a bit monotonous, steamed sea fish and cabbage salad. Because a supply system has not yet been established in the South Continent, the current consumption in Anjou City must be transported from Longtail Island. Audrey felt that today's fish was quite good and very fresh, so she ate a few more bites. Before this, I never thought that establishing effective rule over a place was such a profound subject. The education she received since childhood made her quite proficient in management, but Earl Hall currently only had a manor and no longer had territory under his rule, so Audrey was relatively unfamiliar with this. The morning meeting opened her eyes to Duke Hobert's governing ability. In her opinion, the complex problems of the South Balam Duchy were easily clarified by Duke Hobert. Duke Hobert smiled and said, there are some tricks involved. Once you master the tricks, it's very simple. In my opinion, it's very impressive. Audrey said earnestly. Then she put down her knife and fork and brought up another question. Do we, I mean the South Balam Duchy, have to declare war on the Forsake Empire? This is a transaction, Duke Hobert said with a smile. In at most 5 years, the overall technological level of the South Balam Duchy can basically be on par with the 4 major powers of the North Continent. If a large number of university professors and students could be poached to the South Balam Duchy during the war, this time could definitely be shortened. Audrey understood Duke Hobert's meaning, sacrifice some people to save more people. That's right. Duke Hobert was very pleased that Audrey could now figure out this problem on her own. Audrey did not continue the topic, but instead sighed, 800,000 people. If they all immigrated from Backland, 1/6 of the population of this international metropolis would disappear. Then she asked, I have a very strange question. There are so many people in the East District who can't make ends meet, so why don't they immigrate to the South Continent? After the meeting just now, I also asked Conrad. Because the labor of slaves is too heavy, their mortality rate is very high, and the population of the entire South Continent is not very dense. In the territory of the South Balam Duchy outside the St. Nosé Basin, another 1 or 200,000 people can be settled, and the entire South Continent can accommodate many immigrants. Theoretically speaking, there's no need to crowd into Backland. Because many of them don't know about immigration, Duke Hobert said. I have to admit that, in many cases, cultural level can indeed limit a person's cognition. Most people in the slums are bankrupt farmers, people who had to sell their land due to unstable grain prices and came to the city to find opportunities. They had never been exposed to immigration before and simply couldn't think of this point. Also, they don't have the financial means to immigrate. Ship tickets and food for several months at sea are an exorbitant price for them. Audrey took a deep breath. The authorities should organize passenger ships to send people to the South Continent. The authorities won't do that, Duke Hobert scoffed. For them, the people of the South Continent are all slaves, and the number is already sufficient. Currently, more slaves are not needed. And for the people within the Rune Kingdom, the cost of sending the poor to immigrate is much higher than the cost of letting them fend for themselves. At this point, he suddenly paused. Oh, right, it seems that in the early colonial era, they sent some immigrants to the colonies. It is said that they were all poor people, and their treatment on the ship was not much better than that of slaves. There was even a saying popular in Rune at the time, send all the poor away, and Rune will be rich. Audrey was stunned and, uncharacteristically, said very impolitely, are they some kind of curly-haired baboons? Duke Hobert, however, laughed and said, your description is too polite. In my opinion, curly-haired baboons' thinking is still relatively normal, while that group of politicians simply has something wrong with their brains. Audrey smiled. You're right. The two finished lunch in casual conversation. Duke Hobert sent Audrey back to Backland, while he returned to Anjou to prepare for tomorrow's meeting with the Earth King and generals. As soon as he returned to Anjou, Duke Hobert heard the prayer from the country of disorder. It should be Lawrence's voice. He returned to the room arranged for him, entered the country of disorder, and indeed saw Lawrence's star expanding. Duke Hobert spread his spirituality and heard Lawrence's voice. Oh, the creator in the Order Shadow, please help me inform Mr. Hobert that Governor Jonas of the Forsake Empire wishes to meet with him. Withdrawing his spirituality, Duke Hobert understood that the Forsake Empire wanted to conduct secret negotiations with him, or rather, they intended to try to buy off the forces of the Creator. Duke Hobert smiled. My previous judgment was correct. After the war began, it was indeed the best time to establish a country. In the coming year, I should often be able to play both sides. After a brief thought on this matter, Duke Hobert used travel to arrive at a villa outside Roquelaire City. Without special instructions, Lawrence would definitely be here. Lawrence, in the study on the second floor, felt the change in space in the villa and immediately came out to greet him personally. The two went to a small reception room on the second floor for a private talk. Lawrence briefly described how Governor Jonas came to the villa. He said he had something very important to discuss with you, but he didn't reveal what it was. Duke Hobert smiled and said, a few days ago, I just ambushed St. Milan, the capital of the Forsake Empire, with people from the Tony family. Lawrence was slightly startled. He wouldn't be. He originally wanted to say, he wouldn't be here to kill you, would he? But then he thought that if Jonas still had his sanity, it would be impossible for him to do such a foolish thing. After all, Jonas knew that the Bach family had several demigods, and currently Jonas was alone. Even if an angel from the Forsake Empire came, they might not be able to kill Duke Hobert. He should have been sent to negotiate with us, Duke Hobert said. Have someone call him over. If they waited until after the declaration of war tomorrow to talk, Duke Hobert would not be able to demand such a high price. While the servant went to call him, Duke Hobert asked Lawrence, you should know the news about Rune going to war with the Forsake Empire, right? I know, Lawrence said. For now, we must fully side with the Rune Kingdom on the surface, Duke Hobert said. However, before we consolidate our strength in the South Continent, we should not cut off contact with other countries. Lawrence understood that Duke Hobert was informing him of the core strategy of the Creator forces, instructing the Bach family not to do anything contrary to this strategy. In fact, even if Duke Hobert didn't say it, he was well aware of this point. After all, the forces of the Creator could influence the war situation to a certain extent, and not completely breaking with one of the warring parties would allow them to gain the greatest benefit. Duke Hobert then added, the 3 bangs you have been infiltrating before are very likely to be incorporated into the South Balam Duchy peacefully. As long as the relevant negotiations are completed, for now, let the generals and Earth King of these places maintain their original rule. After I complete the corresponding deployments in the St. Nosé Basin area, I will send officials uniformly to fully incorporate those places into the territory of South Balam. At that time, one of the responsibilities of the Bach family will be to protect the safety of those officials. Lawrence said earnestly, we will definitely protect them. The two chatted for a while longer, and Governor Jonas had already arrived, so the two went to the living room to meet him. At the beginning of the conversation, Duke Hobert ordered all servants to leave and alter the sound transmission path in the living room, so that their voices could only be heard within that living room. Jonas, with his round face and slightly curly hair, saw Duke Hobert being so cautious and knew that the probability of this negotiation succeeding was not small. Then he found it amusing, feeling that the Duke was perhaps too cautious. After all, this was a colony of the Forsake Empire, and the number of Rune spies was very small. After meeting, the three exchanged a few pleasantries, and then Jonas smiled and asked, I heard that the South Balam Duchy is going to declare war on the Forsake Empire. Because there was a significant difference between Rune language and Forsake language, he simply used the ancient Forsac language, which both parties understood. Duke Hobert was very satisfied with this opening. If he had immediately questioned Duke Hobert about the air raid on St. Milan, the negotiation would not have been able to proceed. It wasn't that Duke Hobert was unwilling to admit it, but it would have been very easy for the conversation to become deadlocked on that issue. That seems to be a certainty. Duke Hobert also showed goodwill. After all, the South Balam Duchy is subordinate to the Rune Kingdom. The two looked at each other and smiled, both tacitly not mentioning the air raid on St. Milan for the time being. But it was only for the time being. If the Forsake Empire had the time later, they would definitely settle this score. When Duke Hobert needed to, he would also talk at length about this air raid to provoke the Forsake Empire. But for now, they both had ideas of cooperation. The goodwill released by Duke Hobert made Jonas breathe a sigh of relief. He naturally understood Duke Hobert's implication. This was the arrangement of the Rune Kingdom. However, to be on the safe side, Jonas still wanted to confirm Duke Hobert's intention. After declaring war, do you plan to immediately launch an attack on our colonies in the South Continent? I don't think we need to waste time with such probing, Duke Hobert said straightforwardly. I will give you my promise now. In the South Continent, I will not attack your central and northern colonies for 3 months. But in the North Continent, I will definitely participate in the war, because the price offered by Rune is too tempting. Jonas no longer hid anything. We are also willing to offer some prices, hoping we can reach some agreements, such as not conducting angel level or above battles. This was indeed the most pressing concern for the Forsake Empire at the moment. After all, their angels, including those from the War God Church, were limited. With the Storm Church and the Church of Steam and Machinery not being very active in this war, they could completely handle the situation. However, if high-level combatants from the Creator's forces participated, then there would be no need to fight this war, they could just surrender directly. This was something the Forsake Empire had not anticipated at all before the war. Although they had received intelligence that the Creator had dealt with the Finapot royal family alongside the Rune royal family, they speculated that it was likely an issue of adjacent extraordinary characteristics pathways, a matter of common enemies, rather than a very close cooperation. After all, the Rune royal family did not participate in the South Colson extraordinary battle afterward. But what they did not expect was that at the very beginning of the war, the Creator launched a sneak attack on their capital, St. Milan. Duke Hobert asked with a smile, what price can you offer? That depends on what interests you desire. Salador State and Cordova State. Duke Hobert laid out his conditions. Currently, the Bach family has made certain political and economic investments in 3 states, Salador State, ruled by General Anthony, and Cordova State, ruled by Rivaldo, a noble from the Highland Kingdom. These two states are adjacent and are both colonies of the Forsake Empire. There is also Ove State, whose current ruler is General Adrian, and it is a colony of the Fenaport Kingdom. Jonas was stunned for 2 or 3 seconds before asking, "Are you joking?" The situation in West Baland is somewhat different from East Balam. In West Baland, the colonies of the Intis Republic, the Forsake Empire, and the Fenaport Kingdom are intertwined. Moreover, their 3 countries' colonies are not contiguous, rather, one country has a bit in the northern South Continent, a bit in the central part, and a bit in the southern part, making the situation very complex. These 2 states are the Forsake Empire's main colonies in the southern South Continent. Without these 2 states, the Forsake Empire would have almost no influence in the southern South Continent. Lawrence, who was beside him, appeared relatively calm on the surface, but inwardly, he also felt that the price Duke Hobert offered was a bit high. After all, the Forsake Empire's demand was not to have high-level conflicts with the Creator's forces, but rather not to have the South Balam Principality openly betray the Rune Kingdom and side with the Forsake Empire. Moreover, they still had the fresh grievance of the sneak attack on St. Millen. Although Jonas did not mention this matter for the sake of the overall situation, it did exist. Under such circumstances, even if the Forsake Empire was willing to cooperate, it would be impossible to betray such a large interest as a bargaining chip. Duke Hobert, however, smiled calmly and said, "This is because you are not very clear about the Rune royal family's conspiracy, nor do you know our actual position. You can go to the prayer room to report to your Emperor Alexei and convey my words, and then tell him the conditions I offered. I think they will seem very reasonable to him." Jonas was slightly startled. "Please speak." Duke Hobert continued, "Tell the first emperor of the Forsake Empire that we also do not wish for George III to become a god. Additionally, we know the locations of George III's 9 mausoleums." He leaned back in his chair. "That's all." Jonas's expression became very solemn. At his level, he could obtain some high-level intelligence. He knew that the fundamental reason for the Empire's attack on Rune this time was George III's intention to become a god, and the Empire had no choice but to fight before this happened. Therefore, the negotiation with Duke Hobert had completely exceeded expectations and must be reported to His Majesty the Emperor immediately. He stood up and said, "I'll use the prayer room." At this moment, Jonas was very grateful for Duke Hobert's earlier caution, immediately being wary of eavesdroppers. With such a high-level cooperation, if there was any leak, he could very well become a criminal of the Empire. Lawrence smiled and said, "Please do." Although he didn't know the specific meaning of Duke Hobert's words just now, just by looking at Jonas's reaction, he knew that this matter must be very important, even requiring immediate reporting to their emperor. More than 10 minutes later, Jonas emerged from the prayer room. He smiled at Duke Hobert and said, "Please wait a moment." Duke Hobert just nodded, not asking what they were waiting for. The living room was quiet for a few minutes, then suddenly the space in front of them became illusory, connecting with the spirit world. Vasily, with a stern expression, a high nose, and light yellow hair, emerged from within. "Duke Hobert, greetings. His Majesty the Emperor has sent me to negotiate with you." Duke Hobert smiled and said, "Please be seated." After the 4 of them were seated again, Vasily, without any circumlocution, directly said to Duke Hobert, "Please elaborate on our secret cooperation." Duke Hobert also didn't beat around the bush. "First, it must be kept secret. The Forsake Empire must have at least a demigod as a liaison." "No problem. I will contact you directly from now on." "What is the contact method?" "Contact me through my messenger." Duke Hobert explained the method for summoning his messenger, as well as the need to prepare 3 donuts for each message. Then he continued, "As for the specific cooperation plan, it depends on how much power the Forsake Empire is willing to commit, and whether you are willing to agree to the conditions I just proposed." Vasily immediately said, "When I came, His Majesty the Emperor had already agreed to your conditions. Those 2 states now belong to the South Balam Principality." Duke Hobert smiled and said, "I will complete the takeover within half a month." Vasily agreed very readily. "No problem, the specific matters will be handled by Jonas." Duke Hobert said, "Since you have agreed to my remuneration, I will provide you with the locations of 2 of the mausoleums, as well as the method of entering them." Vasily nodded slightly, then asked, "Will you also send people to destroy the mausoleums?" Of course. Duke Hobert smiled and said, "We will also use hidden forces to try and destroy 2 of the mausoleums, but for both of us, to be on the safe side, it's still more secure to find more people to destroy more mausoleums. Theoretically, destroying 1 or 2 mausoleums should be enough to prevent George III from becoming a god." In fact, Duke Hobert was very clear that even if the Creator's power did not intervene, George III's plan to become a god would be thwarted by Klein. However, this intelligence could fetch a very good price, so he would invite more people to dig graves. The only thing to be careful about is not letting the Rune royal family know, at least not letting them confirm this matter. A little suspicion is fine. Often, this kind of high-level cooperation does not require discussing too many details. Once there is an intention, it can be quickly reached. Moreover, regarding this cooperation, there was a relatively high degree of trust between them. After all, for Alexei, if the Creator could interfere with Philip I's assimilation of the uniqueness, he would certainly also interfere with George III's ascension to godhood. And for Duke Hobert, if there was an opportunity, the Forsake Empire's royal family would definitely disrupt George III's chance to become a god. This was the basis of their mutual trust. After Vasily left, Duke Hobert discussed the handover of the 2 states with Jonas. Duke Hobert promised to acquire Jonas's private property at a good price, but on the condition that Jonas would cooperate with the South Balam Principality in a staged act. The South Balam Principality's army would fire cannons from a safe distance behind, while the Forsake Empire's colonial army would quickly retreat in front, creating the illusion of being driven away. Jonas's personal interests were guaranteed, so he was very willing to help Duke Hobert with this favor. Duke Hobert planned to invite Georgina to witness the South Balam Principality's army pursuing the Forsake Empire's colonial army after the war began. This would also serve as an explanation for Rune's second technical support. As for whether Georgina would see through the act, it didn't matter. In any case, East Balam no longer had to worry about attacks from the Forsake Empire in the southern South continent. After the conversation ended, Duke Hobert returned to Anjou City and instructed Seal to prepare for troop deployment. Currently, the armed forces Duke Hobert had at his disposal for the battlefield were well equipped, but their numbers were a bit small. The governor's mansion on Longtail Island had already begun recruiting soldiers. These soldiers were natives who had been granted land and received tangible benefits. The recruitment scale was 5,000 people. However, this batch of soldiers would only complete their training by next year at the earliest. Duke Hobert could currently only mobilize 3,000 people, and only 2,000 could be transferred to Anjou. After all, a large number of Beyonders had already been drawn from the South Kholson region and Longtail Island, and a portion of the soldiers also needed to be left behind to deal with emergencies. Under normal circumstances, these 2,000 men would be no match for the Forsake Empire's colonial army, but now the situation was special, and only 1,000 men were needed. Duke Hobert directly handed this matter over to Lawrence and Seal, while he returned to Longtail Island. Under his supervision, Furs successfully advanced to Recorder. After Furs collected her spirituality and was in excellent condition, the 2 of them enjoyed dinner together. Duke Hobert said while eating, "Starting today, you will record the abilities of a demigod every day. And every day, spend a few hours using travel to see different parts of the world and record the local customs and traditions." Furs nodded. "That's a good idea." "Of course," Duke Hobert said with a smile. At the same time, he thought to himself, "I've seen the answer key." Furs added, "My teacher Dorian hopes to have a meeting with you." Hobert was slightly stunned when he heard Furs' words. Although he hadn't actively contacted Dorian, why did he always feel like he had stolen something from the fool? After a brief thought, Hobert said, "You can invite Dorian to Longtail Island as a guest. I will meet with him at the governor's mansion." Furs nodded, "I will send out the invitation." Since Furs had just advanced and needed to stabilize her state, Hobert chatted with her for a while before returning to Anjou. Early the next morning, Hobert got up early and began to put on the attire of a ruined kingdom duke. Today, he was to meet the Earth King and the generals, and hold a grand banquet, so he needed to be as proper as possible in terms of etiquette. Within the Duchy of South Balam, there were a total of 2 Earth Kings, or rather, local nobles supported by the Ruin Empire, and 2 generals. However, there were more than a dozen people who came to see the Duke because, For the sake of balance, the ruined kingdom also supported some smaller nobles and warlords. This could effectively prevent any single noble or warlord from completely controlling a region, and it was also a warning to the agents, I can replace you at any time. They were all very excited about this audience. After all, this was the Duke of the most powerful country in the world, a person with great influence in that country. Before this, only 2 or 3 of them had met a ruin lord, and they had always yearned for ruin's high-ranking nobles. In addition, the place Hobert chose to establish his capital also made them breathe a sigh of relief. Because the St. Nosé Basin had fertile land, the ruined kingdom did not support any nobles or warlords there, but chose to immigrate people to this area. Choosing to establish the capital in this inland region would not harm the interests of the nobles and warlords. Some even thought that this duke might not have great ambitions, but such thoughts only dared to be secretly entertained in their hearts. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the audience ceremony officially began, with music and officials responsible for etiquette. The only thing that might not quite match such a high-level ceremony was the place of the audience, which was the courtyard of the former command post, not very large. However, the Earth King and the generals had already found an excuse for the duke. This must be Duke Hobert showing his martial side. That's why he wanted to summon us in the military camp. Subsequently, the majesty and demeanor displayed by Hobert convinced the Earth King and the generals. They all knelt on one knee, scrambling to pledge allegiance to the new master of this land. Hobert, however, smiled and said, "We can talk about allegiance later. Please rise, everyone, let's just chat for a while." Since this was a colony of the ruined kingdom, the official language here was Rune language, and these local nobles and generals spoke Rune language very fluently. In the subsequent casual conversation, they were all somewhat flattered, because this duke actually knew some situations in their territories, such as the approximate scale of cultivated land, the types of minerals being developed, and so on. This was a capability that previous ruined military officers and governors did not possess. This psychological state was like a very insecure person suddenly realizing that they were being paid attention to. They all showed the greatest enthusiasm in discussing the topics initiated by the Duke. Soon the banquet began, and everyone sat down in order of their strength, then all looked at the head of the table. According to the etiquette of the banquet, Hobert stood up and gave a speech. "Today we had a very friendly meeting, and I can feel everyone's enthusiasm. I believe that with our joint efforts, the Duchy of South Balam will definitely have better development." Everyone applauded enthusiastically. Originally, they thought that the Duke would say a few pleasantries and the speech would be over. Up until this point, the atmosphere of the audience was very good, and many nobles and warlords were preparing to return to their territories and lavishly praised Duke Hobert's calm demeanor and broad mind. But Hobert's next words were the key. "But I did not come to the South Continent to chat with everyone, but with a mission from the Rune royal family. I know that there are no places here that sell newspapers from the ruined kingdom, so I will personally announce to everyone, the Duchy of South Balam declared war on the Forsake Empire today. Starting this afternoon, the soldiers stationed in Anjou will launch an offensive to the west, attacking the colonies of the Forsake Empire." Everyone was stunned. Through their respective intelligence, they had successively learned that war had broken out on the North Continent, but they always felt that the war was very far away from them. Of course, they also knew that as agents of the ruined kingdom's colony, it was impossible for them to be completely uninvolved in the war between the two great powers, but they always felt that the ruined kingdom would at most increase their taxes. They never expected to also attack the colonies of the Forsake Empire. After all, they were very clear about the combat effectiveness of their troops. They were simply no match for the Forsake Empire's colonial army. In previous ruined colonial army attacks on the Forsake Empire's colonies, their troops had participated as auxiliary forces, responsible for logistical support and some cover missions. The result was that even such tasks were messed up in various ways. Some hoarded supplies, some deserted in battle, and some even mistook the enemy and fought alongside the Forsake Empire against the ruined army. A long time ago, the ruined colonial army reached a consensus. It was perfectly fine for them to maintain order in the rear, there was no need to participate in the war. But the necessary statements still had to be made. Several warlords immediately expressed their willingness to hand over most of their troops to Hobert's command. For them, it was just a loss of some guns and uniforms, and they could just recruit another batch. Hobert smiled and said, "You misunderstood my meaning. I hope you will provide some support in other areas." Everyone was slightly stunned, and instantly understood that it was still about money and food. Everyone in the room gave it very readily. For them, this money and food used to go to the governor's mansion, but now it was just going to the Duchy of South Balam. Hobert seemed quite satisfied with everyone's cooperation. "I'm relieved that everyone is so proactive. In addition, there are 2 more things to announce to everyone. First, I plan to establish an outer cabinet, which can participate in the duchy's decision-making discussions, and propose some suggestions to the duchy government. The government's policies will also consult everyone's opinions." Hobert's words were very misleading, making people feel that this outer cabinet was like a simplified version of a parliament. However, Hobert did not grant the most important legislative power, and the legitimacy of this organization was entirely bestowed by Hobert. If he wanted to dissolve the outer cabinet, this organization would immediately become illegal. The local nobles and warlords all thought that this was the Duke binding their interests with the political interests of the duchy, and they were, of course, very willing to participate in the top-level structure of the duchy. So when Hobert asked who was willing to join the outer cabinet, everyone eagerly expressed their willingness to join. Hobert continued with a kind smile, "Now for the second matter. In order to better integrate the duchy's forces and strike at the Forsake Empire, all land, natural resources, and population within the duchy will be nationalized. All of you are now members of the outer cabinet, and of course, you must support this national policy of the duchy. Oh, by the way, members of the outer cabinet must always perform their duties in Anjou, and no one can leave this city, otherwise it will be considered treason." Everyone was stunned. After 7 or 8 seconds, a local nobleman finally asked, "Your Grace, does all land include our private estates?" Hobert smiled and said, "According to the new policy, everyone in the duchy can only own 1 to 5 mu of cultivated land, depending on the situation, and even I am no exception. You can calculate the amount of land you can own in the future by multiplying the number of people in your family by 5, and any excess will still be nationalized." The nobles all understood that this was also a move against their private property, and their faces immediately turned very ugly. A warlord then asked, "Your Grace, if we have no land and no population, how can we feed our soldiers? How can we maintain effective rule over our territories and stably supply you with gold and grain?" "You don't need to worry about that. I will send people to manage all the territories of the duchy," Hobert said. "Once you become members of the outer cabinet, you will no longer need to pay me gold and grain." The implication was, "I can take it myself." He then added, "Also, your families must also move to Anjou city to supplement the city's population." Everyone's hearts sank again. This was preparing to pull out the roots. Another warlord said, "Duke Hobert, you might not be very clear about the situation in our Balana state. Previously, soldiers and governors of the ruined kingdom also wanted to directly control it. But they encountered problems such as language barriers and different customs, and often clashed with the local people. It's precisely because of this." Hobert interrupted him. "I said, you don't need to worry about this." As he spoke, he released a portion of his demigod pressure, instantly making everyone present afraid to breathe. Most of these local nobles and warlords were also Beyonders, some even Sequence 5, and they certainly knew what the pressure Hobert had just displayed represented. After all, before this, there was also a demigod governor in southern East Balam. Hobert withdrew his pressure on everyone and then asked with a smile, regarding the duchy's new policy, who is in favor? Who is against it? Some were terrified, some had not yet accepted the fact, and some were already considering how to resist. So Hobert asked again, "Are you all mute?" Only then did everyone seem to come back to their senses and say, I agree, I agree. This good national policy must certainly be supported. Quote. Hobert nodded in satisfaction. After lunch, have your trusted subordinates go back and report. Before your families move in, you can all stay in this command post. I will arrange your food and lodging. As he spoke, Hobert clapped his hands, and the dishes began to be served. This meal was very rich, with beef, lamb, seafood, and vegetables that could only be eaten on the North Continent. Hobert found the lunch very delicious. However, everyone else's mood was very suppressed. They ate quietly, and sometimes, even after chewing the food in their mouths for a long time, they couldn't taste what they were eating. Hobert finished first. He drained the red wine in his glass and placed the napkin on the table. What a pleasant lunch. Well, gentlemen, I wish you all an enjoyable meal. After speaking, Hobert stood up and left. The people at the table looked at each other, and at this moment, their thoughts were surprisingly consistent. They couldn't let this arrogant duke succeed. With the affairs of the Duchy of South Balam temporarily concluded, Hobert gave Conrad and Donna a few more instructions regarding work, then temporarily returned to Backland. Next, he planned to raid the valley where the Tamara family was hiding, as well as several of their main strongholds, to see if he could find Erebus there. The reason he waited more than half a month after Orsay's death to attack was because Hobert had previously believed that this attack might require another Beander war. After all, the strength of this Beander family was evident. 2 angels, at least 1 sequence 3, and Hobert guessed there should be 2 to 5 sequence 4s. Although their strength was not comparable to the witch sect, they still needed to be dealt with carefully. However, inspired by the airstrike on St. Milan, Hobert suddenly had a good idea. As for whether Tamara family members would flee their habitat after realizing Orsay had been killed, Hobert had considered this point and believed the probability of these family members escaping was small. After all, they had 2 angels and currently a demigod's clone. They should be quite hopeful that Hobert would bring people to their hidden valley, as there was a high probability that Erebus would take the opportunity to corrupt a large number of Beyonders. The Tamara family would also use their home field advantage to strike at the Creator's Beander power. Moreover, they had no way of confirming whether Orsay had betrayed the family after her death. Hobert believed that now was the best time for a sneak attack. In the early morning, Hobert glanced at the mist outside the window and used travel to arrive at a wilderness in the northern part of Backland. Then he prayed to himself, sitting on the Iron Throne, holding the Black Emperor card and the Sun Scepter in his hands. While possessing a position similar to that of an angel king, his entire body was covered in golden yellow armor, and a handsome golden yellow cloak appeared on his back. Hobert used his stars to step into the real world. With a slight lift of the scepter in his hand, he infused spirituality into it, and 2 magnificent horses bathed in golden light appeared, standing docilely beside Hobert. Behind them was the sun god chariot, made of gold. The chariot was not large, with a guard reaching his abdomen in front, and 2 wheels burning with golden yellow flames. At this moment, the entire wilderness became extremely bright, as if a sun had fallen to the ground. Hobert leapt onto the chariot and quickly ascended into the clouds, the 2 majestic horses galloping vigorously. His new idea was to drive the chariot to beat Tamara. Even if he couldn't win, he could certainly escape. The scenery on the ground was rapidly receding, and people along the way were somewhat puzzled, wondering if they had just experienced a hallucination. It wasn't even sunrise yet, but it felt like a sun had just sped overhead. Hobert circled the Minsk Mountains several times, which made the Beyonders of the War God Church and the Church of the Night Goddess, who were confronting each other at the mouth of the Minsk Mountains and Ananda Mountains, notice the anomaly. However, they all thought it might be the opponent's conspiracy or some trap, so they only noticed that the power of the sun over there was a bit off, but did not send anyone to investigate. Hobert searched for more than 20 minutes, and his spirituality finally found the large black tree that Orsay had mentioned. From the air, the black tree was only the size of a normal tree, and only its trunk was black. Its leaves were not entirely black, making it inconspicuous in a vast forest. Fortunately, it seemed to have some connection with the Order wood, which allowed Hobert's spirituality to discover it once he was close enough. Under true sight, Hobert saw a dense mist pervading the valley not far from the large tree, and his spirituality told him that it should be where the Tamara family was hiding. He realized that by using the power of the Country of Disorder and the Sun Scepter, he should also be able to forcibly dispel these mists, so he decided that to give the Tamara family a greater shock, he would simply and forcibly disperse the mist in the valley completely. Hobert first used the image of the Creator to send a signal to Lawrence, then came above the black tree, raising the Sun Scepter high. The sun that had just risen on the horizon suddenly became extremely bright, and all the dazzling sunlight gathered on the Sun Scepter. It was Hobert's first time controlling such surging power, and he felt somewhat overwhelmed. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his mind, and guided the bright sunlight to its target. From the sun in the sky, a very thick beam of light shot down. Whoosh! When this beam of light fell on the dense fog in front of Hobert, It even rubbed against the air, emitting a whoosh sound. At this moment, Hobert was also shocked by the power he had summoned. It was a beam of light like a light wall, covering the entire valley. Its high temperature caused clouds of mist to swirl around it, making it look very ethereal. Crack! The black tree under Hobert's feet split open in the middle and immediately burst into flames. The Council of Knowledge led by Lawrence and the forces of the Bach family arrived. Their mission was to clear the battlefield and encircle and kill the escaping Tamara family members. But when they had just arrived, either by using corresponding sealed artifacts or with the assistance of Jonathan and others, they were completely stunned by the scene before them. The enormous pillar of light deeply shocked their hearts, and some lower sequence members even had the urge to kneel and praise the sun god. When the huge pillar of light disappeared, they immediately discovered the source of this surging power, the creator standing on the chariot emitting golden yellow light. Although this was different from the creator's usual appearance, they immediately recognized that it was the creator. Lawrence and others successively drew corresponding symbols on their chests, praising the creator's great power. After being greatly shocked, Jonathan and others exchanged glances, lamenting that the Council of Knowledge had found a powerful backer. Then Jonathan sighed, regretting deeply that when he negotiated with Hobert back then, he had not fully pledged allegiance to the Creator. This meant that they could currently only receive some protection from the Creator and occasionally participate in some less important operations. In fact, they also very much hoped to participate in the development of the South Balam Duchy, which meant they would have the opportunity to become official Beander administrators of the duchy. That was not just as simple as having Helen's Beander team being Beyonders, but being able to participate in the duchy's Beander decision-making. Jonathan sighed, currently only able to place his hopes on Vienna, who had been sacrificed to the Creator, hoping she could move the Creator to fully incorporate the Council of Knowledge. Otherwise, they would only be able to follow the path of Hobert's two wives, having more members join the Witch Research Association and the Traveler Research Association. While Jonathan was lost in thought, the Creator in the sky drove the chariot forward, beginning a new round of offensive. Hobert, on the sun god chariot, took several deep breaths, feeling a huge consumption of his spirituality. Since becoming a demigod, it was the first time he felt that his spirituality seemed somewhat insufficient. Hobert then realized that even if the Sun Scepter only possessed a slight essence of uniqueness, it was not something that Beyonders below the angel level could control. Fortunately, he also held the Black Emperor card. If it weren't for this blasphemy card raising his position, that huge pillar of light just now might have broken free from his control. Steadying his mind, Hobert drove the chariot forward. The black tree had been dried and burned, and the mist in the valley was completely dispelled. Not only that, but the pillar of light just now had scorched many plants, and many people who hadn't had time to hide were also dried into jerky, with their extraordinary characteristics falling beside them. Although the entire valley looked lifeless, Hobert was very clear that many Beyonders were still hiding in the valley. After all, that layer of mist had consumed most of the light pilar's power, and only a little afterglow had shown in here. The scene here was similar to the psychical results Hobert had seen from Tamara family members long ago. Many villas with fourth epoch architectural styles were scattered throughout the valley, and on the mountainside, there was a magnificent temple. The only difference was that the scene Hobert had seen before was filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers, while now the flowers and plants had turned into withered grass and trees, and the birds flying in the sky had turned into roasted bird meat, fallen to the ground. Hobert drove the chariot unhurriedly towards the temple, and the Beyonders inside the temple also realized the danger. They injected spirituality into the magic array in the temple, and a dense mist was released from the temple's windows and doors, heading straight for Hobert. Hobert smiled slightly, strengthened his connection with the country of disorder, and directly absorbed the mist around the chariot. The mist, illuminated by the light emanating from the chariot, swirled and enveloped Hobert, making him appear extremely sacred. The Beyonders in the temple were all stunned. It was said that these mists contained extremely powerful corruption, which even deities dared not face directly. How could this being in the sky not only be unafraid but also easily gain control of these mists? In fact, Tamara had once instructed them not to use these mists if the Creator attacked, because they would be useless. Hobert's attack here today, driving the sun god chariot, had completely bewildered them, and they had not connected him with the Creator at all. Hobert in midair raised his scepter, and dozens of huge, pure spheres of light formed around him, falling towards the ground. 4 of these light spheres exploded over the temple, releasing dazzling light that seemed to eliminate all the filth and gloom inside. The Beyonders inside had their bodies ignited and screamed as they ran out of the temple. Many people even disintegrated directly under the strong light, leaving only a pile of dust. The ground not far from the temple suddenly cracked open, and a male in his 30s with a sallow, somewhat sickly complexion rushed out. It was Petty Tamara. At this moment, he was the only angel in the valley, and he had to temporarily resist the being in the sky for a while to create an opportunity for the surviving family members to escape. The light spheres Hobert projected from the chariot were all solar flames. Although their explosions wouldn't cause too violent a blast to collapse buildings, anyone illuminated by their intense light would basically burst into flames or simply turn into a pile of ashes. As dozens of solar flames descended, the valley where the Tamara family resided echoed with wails. Many people, engulfed in flames, fled in all directions, causing more areas to catch fire. The flames on their bodies were influenced by extraordinary power, making them difficult to extinguish. Crucially, the survivors at the moment couldn't attend to them. Those not hit by the strong light were all fleeing through secret passages. Though the Duke of Entropy, Petty, hiding underground, had come to the surface, he didn't dare directly face the Creator. He only dared to distort the landing points of some solar flames on the ground. However, the effect of such distortion was not significant, as after they exploded, the light would spread in all directions, and anyone illuminated by it would be harmed. Immediately after, countless sacred lights appeared around Hobert. These lights gradually intensified, shining down on the ground. These strong lights seemed to refract, not only entering houses but also appearing to turn corners, entering underground through the entrances of secret passages. In this surrounding land, it seemed all darkness had nowhere to hide. These lights caught up with the Tamara family members who were fleeing through the secret passages. The light immediately became scorching, igniting these members one by one. Petty tried hard to distort these light beams. Most of the light beams, after being distorted by him to other places, would still curve back and continue to shine in their original direction. Upon realizing that none of his family members might escape, Petty immediately used distortion of space to leave. But when Petty appeared dozens of kilometers away, he found the sun still shining brightly above his head. He looked up at the sky and saw that the chariot with golden light had followed, now directly above him. And Petty saw that in the hands of that existence in midair, there was now a pure white long spear. He quickly distorted the distance again, continuing to move away from there. But when he reappeared, the existence on the chariot was still above his head, and the long spear had already left his hand, shooting towards him. Petty knew that he couldn't avoid this attack by distorting distance, so he used the ability of chaos to tear open the space in front of him, exposing the spirit world. The spirit world and the real world merged, and space fell into complete chaos. However, that dark spear was like a fine needle, piercing through the seemingly wrinkled space, as if it was not affected by the chaotic space at all. Petty's expression was grave. Just as the dark spear was about to stab him, he suddenly altered his stature, an adult instantly becoming palm-sized. The dark spear actively adjusted its posture, but because the distance was too close, it couldn't change its trajectory. It ultimately grazed Petty's hair and embedded itself in the ground. Bang! The dark spear cracked open, emitting blinding, ray-like light that swept across the surroundings. Petty immediately altered his thickness again. He was like a palm-sized paper figure, deftly dodging those rays, thus avoiding being swept. At this moment, Hobert in the sky had already launched a new attack. 7 small light spheres revolved around his scepter, which looked like it was made of gold. The light spheres left the scepter one by one, flying towards Petty. Petty's body had now returned to its normal state. He amplified the chaotic space he had just created, extending the chaotic space for dozens of kilometers, almost causing those few light spheres to fall into the mud-like space. But those light spheres still broke through the chaotic space and surrounded Petty. Petty immediately used the ability of use to prematurely end the duration of these light spheres. The light spheres, which could originally last for several seconds, could now only last for 1.5 seconds. They immediately emitted scorching light, as if 7 suns surrounded Petty, baking his flesh and soul. Petty immediately distorted his position with a stone on the ground. When the stone appeared in his place, it immediately turned into stone dust. The 7 small suns were about to continue their pursuit, but halfway through, they rapidly dimmed and vanished without a trace. Petty stared at the place where the light spheres disappeared for about half a second. He always felt that the opponent's attack should not be limited to this, but he, of course, did not know what follow-up these attacks might have. Now he couldn't afford to investigate, because he also had his own plan. Petty altered the boundary between the real world and the spirit world, making that chaotic area even larger. Hobert, meanwhile, raised his scepter, pointing it at the sun on the horizon. The sun suddenly grew enormous, covering more than half the sky. The intense sunlight and various harmful rays made Petty feel as though he would melt from the dazzling light. At this very moment, Hobert, his chariot, Petty, and the bright surrounding space, this entire area suddenly became very close to the sun, roughly like the distance between Mercury and the sun. Some pale blue flames appeared in this space, that was hydrogen in the air burning. The sun's high temperature caused the hydrogen in the air to spontaneously combust. The prerequisite for this large-scale, high-intensity attack was that the surroundings needed to be sufficiently bright. Therefore, Hobert's previous 2 rounds of attacks, while preventing Petty from escaping, were also preparing for this ability. Petty, feeling his spiritual body suffering immensely, couldn't help but let out a cry. While altering the intensity of the sunlight, he hastily pulled out a sealed artifact from his pocket and injected his spirituality into the chaotic space in front of him. In the chaotic space, a creature with a very hard-looking shell immediately appeared. It was somewhat like a giant conch, but at the tail of the conch, besides some hard-shelled appendages like those of a crab, there was also a blood-red human upper body. Its appearance caused the surrounding ground to turn into a muddy mess. Bubbles emerged from this mud, and each bursting bubble emitted an evil sound, as if it were a malicious curse on the real world. It was as if the surrounding air immediately turned evil. This was something a Beander of the Tamara families, door, pathway accidentally discovered in the spirit world, a creature that had suffered strange pollution. It seemed to correspond to a sequence 2 inches ancient evil god, of the prisoner pathway. Because the unknown pollution it suffered was very special, it presented the appearance of a sea monster, but it itself did not possess the abilities of the sailor pathway. To summon it, a large area of chaotic space and a sealed artifact containing its blood were required. At this moment, Petty's spirituality had realized that this mysterious existence driving the golden chariot was precisely the creator. Petty, at his level, knew some information about the creator. He roughly knew the connection between the creator and Erebus, so the creator was not afraid of the pollution from the mists. However, he believed that the creator should not have much resistance to pollution from other pathways. That's why Petty went to such great lengths to summon this conch. The conch, facing the bright sunlight, quickly retreated into its shell. Immediately after, its shell sprayed black liquid in all directions. Hobert's spirituality sensed that these liquids were very dangerous. He ended the maintenance of the enormous sun and immediately climbed to high altitude to evade. The sun in the sky rapidly shrank, returning to its normal size after 2 or 3 seconds. Petty, whose spiritual body and physical body were both harmed by the scorching sunlight, used this window of opportunity to escape. Soon, Hobert's spirituality could no longer sense his presence, and the summoned conch, after spraying some black liquid, used the chaotic space between the real world and the spirit world to hide back in the spirit world. Hobert did not stop it, as he realized that the pollution emanating from this conch was not something he could deal with at the moment. The black liquid the conch had just sprayed was already polluting the surrounding land. The plants, which had been scorched dry, grew eyes without eyelids or tongues with fangs. Hobert, taking advantage of the chaotic space Petty had created not yet disappearing, immediately used distortion to send that piece of land into the spirit world. Then he immediately used the ability of use to accelerate the space's recovery. Ultimately, this battlefield was left with only a large pit on the ground, dozens of kilometers in diameter and 3 to 4 kilometers deep. Hobert drove the chariot to the next bombing point, again using dozens of pure light spheres to bomb 4 other strongholds of the Tamara family, including the secret stronghold provided by Orsay. Although it wasn't a bombing with explosives, the effect was even better than bombs. These strongholds all turned into a sea of fire, and the personnel suffered heavy losses. Unfortunately, in these strongholds, he did not encounter Erebus, nor did he meet Tamara. Hobert, somewhat disappointed, drove the chariot back to his physical body and ended the summoning. Returning to the real world, Hobert immediately used travel to rush to the valley where the Tamara family had previously hidden. In the spirit world, Hobert recalled the attack of the Sun Scepter just now. Its level and power were probably a bit higher than Sequence 2, but had not reached the Sequence 1 level. For Hobert currently, this was already very good, because this was a tangible angel-level attack, unlike attacks using the Country of Disorder, which looked powerful but were actually difficult to harm enemies at the angel level and above. One had to use a sealed artifact to achieve good attack results. At this point, he arrived at the location he had marked earlier, left the spirit world, and entered the real world. The large fire in the valley had already been extinguished by Lawrence and others using extraordinary abilities. The Bach family was recovering extraordinary characteristics and rounding up enemies hiding in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to escape. But so far, they had not found any survivors. The power of the Sun Scepter seemed to penetrate everywhere. No matter which dark corner one hid in, they could be illuminated. Hobert asked Lawrence about the situation and was about to join the search team when his spirituality sensed something. He saw a lady appear not far away, wearing a simple robe, with a bark belt around her waist, and bare feet. The appearance of this lady reminded Hobert of the time at the bottom of St. Samuel Cathedral, when he was looked at by the Black Knight goddess and slowly disappeared. It was just that at that time, he seemed to be erased by an eraser, while this lady appeared little by little. Combined with the other party's attire, Hobert roughly guessed who she was, so he bowed slightly and said, "Your Highness Ariana." This lady was none other than the abbess of the Black Knight Abbey, the chief of the 13 archbishops, servant of secrets, Ariana. She was not surprised that Hobert recognized her. What just happened here? Just now, Ariana had reported the sudden strong light here to the Black Knight goddess, and the goddess's response was, "No danger." That's why she came to check. As for Hobert in front of her, Ariana often saw his name in reports and knew he was a god blessed of the goddess, so she didn't bother with pleasantries and immediately asked her question. "Your Highness." Hobert maintained sufficient politeness towards an angel. After a long period of investigation, we learned that this is the hiding place of the Tamara family. So the Great, the Creator, launched an attack here. Now that the attack is over, we are cleaning up the battlefield. You can just call me Madam. Ariana saw that the surroundings had basically turned into ruins. This seemed to be the ability of the Sun pathway, but she did not ask about it, instead asking, how was the battle result? This raid killed a large number of middle sequence and low sequence beyonders from the other side. Hobert replied, currently, only one demigod level extraordinary characteristic has been seized. The enemy's high-end combat power did not seem to suffer much loss, but the Tamara family almost lost most of its potential, because if a large number of middle sequence beyonders, who were the backbone of the organization, died, it would mean that this organization would lack stamina. Once high-level combat power is lost, it will be difficult to effectively replenish it. Ariana slowly nodded. This family was not very active in the extraordinary world to begin with. From now on, they will probably disappear for a period of time. Hobert, however, said, not necessarily. As far as I know, they have established contact with an ancient evil god. Under the influence of that ancient evil god, they are very likely to do some crazy things. Ariana said, I have read the relevant reports you provided, and we are also highly concerned about this, but now it was wartime, and the Church of the Night Goddess could no longer care about these things. Speaking of this, Ariana waved her hand. I wish you good luck in seizing more demigod-level items. Thank you. Hobert watched the other party leave before realizing that the darkness pathway seemed to only have abilities related to darkness, right? Would this, servant of secrets, blessing really bring good luck? Fortunately, not long after, a demigod-level sealed artifact was seized, which made Hobert breathe a sigh of relief. This valley was the ancestral home of the Tamara family, and almost all of their accumulated wealth was here. And Hobert's attack just now was so swift that it didn't give them a chance to transfer those accumulated assets. So they found more than one warehouse, with a lot of gold, gems, and other valuables. There were also many sealed artifacts, especially level 3 sealed artifacts. The accumulation of such a 1,000-year-old family was very rich, which greatly alleviated the shortage of level 3 sealed artifacts in the Creator's forces. Generally, level 3 sealed artifacts come from various extraordinary events that are not very high level. Only organizations that have existed long enough can collect many level 3 sealed artifacts through various coincidences. And level 3 sealed artifacts are suitable for the widest range of people, and can greatly improve the combat power of the lower level Beyonders in an extraordinary organization. Compared with such ancient extraordinary families, the Creator's forces still lacked sufficient accumulation time. But Hobert soon discovered that they had not found the place where they stored extraordinary characteristics. Logically, such a family should have extraordinary characteristic reserves, and with almost no one escaping, these reserves should not have been taken away in time. But Hobert quickly began to plan how to use those gems, and did not continue to consider the issue of extraordinary characteristic accumulation. According to the intelligence Hobert received, there should be a wanderer from the Abraham family and the Tamara family. These gems should have been collected by Beyonders of the traveler pathway. It is said that they love all kinds of gems very much. The seized gems can be used to lay out teleportation arrays, which can save a lot of cost. Finally, the members of the Bach family separated the extraordinary spoils from some valuables and piled them together, then established the Traveler's Gate, and temporarily stored them on Longtail Island. Hobert then went to several other strongholds, where Angus, Elliot, Helen, and the Pix team were already cleaning up the battlefield respectively. The spoils there were relatively meager, with only some extraordinary characteristics. When Hobert heard that many gold pounds stored in safes had been burned, he secretly felt it was a pity, but it was not good to show it. Thus, this raid achieved victory with no casualties among the Creator's forces. After spending a morning cleaning up the battlefield, the various units withdrew in an orderly manner. Hobert was very happy. He felt that this tactic was very effective against secret organizations, and such a battle case could be replicated in the future. However, the members of the various extraordinary units were not happy. They had originally wanted to take this opportunity to earn more merits, but ended up just searching the battlefield. Occasionally, they would encounter an enemy, but dozens of people would surround him. Not only were the enemies desperate, but the members of the extraordinary units were also desperate. According to the relevant regulations for calculating merits in the Creator's forces, with so many people killing one person, there would be nothing left when the merits were divided. Hobert timely noticed that everyone's mood was low and told them that an extraordinary war would soon break out in the South Balam Duchy, and also issued an additional portion of merits, which then restored their morale to a certain extent. That night, the spoils were tallied: 92 extraordinary characteristics of the lawyer, arbitrator, and apprentice pathways, and many sealed artifacts of various types. There were also large amounts of seized valuables, including gold, gems, and some antiques, totaling about 800,000 gold pounds. Hobert, who was no longer worried about money, shamelessly commented in his heart, "This family is very poor." Naturally, there was a celebration banquet that night, and Hobert sat with Lawrence, Angus, and other officers of the extraordinary units. Lawrence spoke of his discovery while cleaning the battlefield. "In some villas, I found many deceased people with facial tattoos. This reminded me of some records I had seen in the family's notes. If I'm not mistaken, the Tamara family is still using some systems from the 4th epoch. They should still be raising slaves of various pathways, such as sex slaves, clowns, servants, and so on. Slave owners would tattoo different humiliating patterns on the faces of slaves for different purposes. This made everyone stunned, finding such a slave-owning system very novel. Hobert also recalled some information he had seen. In the 4th epoch, raising slaves was still legal. It is said that there were even some Beyonder slaves at that time, who basically came from prisoners of war. In fact, now, raising slaves has become illegal on the surface, but slaves have always existed, especially in the South Continent. I heard that in some markets, slaves are sold alongside cattle and horses. Speaking of this, Hobert suddenly recalled Orsay. She always wore a veil, and when defeated by Hobert, she preferred to wear a human skin mask to die. In the villa where the Bach family was stationed, in the suburbs of Rocklear City, 3 Beyonders formed a patrol team, conducting routine patrols in the courtyard and on the first floor. The patrol team followed the route to the villa hall, where a permanent altar for sacrificing to the Creator was built. The 4 corners of the altar had exquisite patterns, and there were marble steps, looking very solemn. At this time, there was no sacrifice, and the altar appeared empty. There was nothing to patrol around the altar, as there were basically no blind spots. Just as the patrol team was about to exit through the back door, a violent whirlwind suddenly blew on the altar, causing the doors and windows to shake violently, opening and closing non-stop. The patrol team was stunned, and then they realized that some existence seemed to be bestowing something on the altar. According to normal procedures, a spiritual wall would be built before the bestowal ceremony, so that the strong wind generated by the ceremony would not spread beyond the altar. Just as the 3 Beyonders reacted and were about to blow their whistles to warn, a phantom gate seemed to open above the altar, and a figure jumped out of the phantom gate, landing steadily on the altar. This figure was in her 20s, with long hair styled beautifully, and some freckles on her cheeks. It was Moira. The members of the patrol team thought they had seen wrong. Wasn't Moira sacrificed to the Creator? How did she come back? Before they could speak, Lawrence, a tall figure, had already appeared on the second-floor balcony. Moira. You. Diz, the Creator, not like you. By the end, Lawrence's voice was trembling slightly. During this period, due to some work interactions, he had contact with Helen's Beyonder team, which made him realize the gap between Moira, who was sacrificed to the Creator, and witches, and had been anxious for several days because of it. At this moment, Moira suddenly appeared on the altar, and Lawrence was instantly somewhat frightened. Patriarch, we were all wrong. Moira came down from the altar, carrying a wooden box. The Creator's divine kingdom is very large. Previously, only the God-blessed Hobert was managing it. Now he doesn't have time to manage it, so he let us go to help. Lawrence opened his mouth. This was even more unexpected for him. Moira continued, I'm on break today, so I came back. From now on, I can probably rest once every 7 or 8 days. Oh, by the way, the God-blessed Hobert asked me to tell you that he might need a few more Beyonders to work in the Creator's divine kingdom recently, and hopes you make some preparations. Lawrence was stunned for 2 or 3 seconds before nodding, okay. To be honest, he even wanted to go and see the Creator's divine kingdom. What Hobert did not expect was that Audrey was going to advance again so quickly. Originally, she could have waited a bit longer to stabilize her state, but the war gave her a strong sense of urgency. So, after a few days of preparation, Audrey attempted to advance to Sequence 5. In fact, Hobert was mainly helping her prepare. The extraordinary characteristic used for the advancement was from Hobert's old stock, one of which was seized from Herwin Lambus, a member of the Psychological Alchemists' Council. There was also an extraordinary characteristic of a dream weaver. He had forgotten where he seized it from. It seemed to be from Archibald, or perhaps from Adam's Island. Now, Hobert no longer keeps track of extraordinary characteristics below demigod level. Generally, when he sacrifices them to the country of disorder, he just casually throws them onto the stone platform. When needed, he would search for them. Anyway, Hobert's spirituality is very sensitive now. Even if he doesn't keep statistics on the extraordinary characteristics, his spirituality will certainly give some hints when needed, and then he can just go to the country of disorder to search. As for the auxiliary materials needed for advancement, for Hobert, who owns 2 extraordinary auction houses, obtaining auxiliary materials of this level was effortless. Audrey found that the only thing she could do was ask Mr. the Fool to help her stay awake in her dream. This was the ritual for advancing to Sequence 5. Still under Hobert's supervision, Audrey took the potion, then stood there motionless like a stone sculpture for 2 or 3 minutes, as if her soul had just returned to her body, showing some trembling or changes in expression. After another 2 or 3 minutes, Audrey used soothing and psychological suggestion to quickly stabilize her state. It wasn't as difficult as I imagined. Hobert smiled and said, "That's because your potion digestion is quite good, and you did a lot of psychological suggestion before taking the potion. Relatively speaking, this pathway makes it easier to maintain a good state." Audrey nodded and shared the process of her advancement with Hobert. "So the purpose of that ritual was to prevent me from getting lost in the dream." Hobert reminded her, "Even if you are a dream weaver now, you should still be careful when you are in a dream. If you accidentally jump into the dream of a Beyander who is not in a good state, you will also be affected." If she encountered a very dangerous dream, Audrey's spirituality should issue a warning to prevent her from entering such a dream. The fear is not that it's very dangerous, but that it's a dream that will have an impact. Audrey noted Hobert's reminder, then discussed her abilities with Hobert. Hobert shared his views. The spectator pathway abilities are not suitable for direct combat with enemies. It's more suitable to hide, subtly influence the target's state, and then, when the time is right, suddenly strike and directly eliminate the opponent. Normally, practice hypnosis more, or practice psychological suggestion in dreams. After all, you are a dream weaver, and your abilities might be more effective in dreams. Audrey nodded. "I understand." The two discussed extraordinary abilities for a while longer, then went to the dining room together for a meal. Just like the last advancement, Hobert supervised Audrey's advancement this time while visiting Earl Hall's mansion. During the meal, everyone first discussed the current war situation. Currently, for Ruin, the situation is still optimistic. The only concern for the Parliament and the government is that a large number of large-caliber artillery and heavy machine guns were used in this battle, causing a large number of casualties among frontline soldiers. These weapons were not used on the battlefield for the first time, but previously they were mostly used on colonial battlefields. How could the warlords and Earth Kings of the South Continent be a match for such advanced weapons of the colonial army? And battles between colonial armies were generally not large-scale, basically not forming the kind of artillery bombardment seen now. Both sides' high-level officials were a bit stunned by the current casualties. But at the same time, they are doing everything in their national power to send more soldiers and weapons to the battlefield, hoping that the opponent will be unable to sustain first. The last time a large-scale war occurred on the North Continent was hundreds of years ago, when the Forsake Empire and Ruin competed for Sonia Island. At that time, there were no such powerful cannons. This war, in effect, tested the results of more than 100 years of industrial revolution and technological development. According to incomplete statistics, the war has only been going on for about a month, and the casualties on Ruin's side alone have exceeded 400,000. The Forsake Empire, as the attacking side, certainly would not be much better, but because both sides still have great war potential, the battle remains very fierce. Earl Hall estimated that the war might continue until November before the first phase of the battle could conclude. By then, more than a fifth of the soldiers on both sides would have died, and they would both need to wait for new recruits from the rear to be sent to the front before launching a new offensive. Then, of course, they talked about the situation in the South Continent. Earl Hall asked Hobert, "I heard that the situation in the South Balam Duchy is a bit unstable. To be precise, it's very chaotic." Hobert smiled and said, "The local Earth Kings and warlords are unwilling to give up their territories and ruling power, so the South Balam Duchy might face a civil war." Hibert asked Hobert, "Is this your plan?" If it had been before, he would have thought Hobert was crazy, but after the commercial war in Backland, he had realized that Hobert's way of thinking about problems was different from his own, or rather, from most people's. "That's right," Hobert said seriously. "If a country, at its inception, does not undergo a war to eliminate all existing interest groups, then in the years that follow, the internal affairs of that country will most likely only involve mutual compromise and bickering. If there's profit to be made, it's fine, everyone will appear very harmonious on the surface, but once the profits are not so generous, a civil war will most likely break out for the sake of competing for interests. So, in my opinion, it's better to have a civil war at the beginning of the nation's founding, to avoid making the situation more complicated." Earl Hall commented, "This is a good idea, although it differs somewhat from some contemporary ideas." Hibert also nodded slowly. Based on the education he had always received and the experience gained from practice, politics seemed to be a process of mutual compromise. But listening to Hobert, he seemed to have no intention of making any compromises in the South Balam Duchy. Hobert smiled and said, "One can only say that the situations are different, and the ways to solve problems are also different." The conversation ended there, as Earl Hall and Hibbert realized that the strategies emphasized in ruined politics were completely different from establishing a country. After dinner, the group took their usual stroll in the garden. Audrey quietly asked, "Hobert, will many people die in the Civil War?" "Some Beyonders might die," Hobert replied, "but ordinary people shouldn't die much. After all, the combat effectiveness of those Earth Kings and Warlords troops is hard to describe." Audrey let out an, "Oh, I didn't expect the world to become so turbulent by the end of this year." Hobert, however, said, "When the royal family began their plan, a series of wars was destined to happen." Audrey, of course, knew that the royal family's plan, Hobert referred to as His Majesty the King's plan to become a god. But at this time, Audrey had already understood many issues. She realized that this world was inherently full of barbarism and chaos. It was just that these barbarism and chaos were now brought into the open. Late at night, the northernmost part of Sonia Island. Here, cold winds howled, sweeping snow from the mountaintops and scattering it everywhere, as if a blizzard was raging at all times. In the leeward side of the snowdrifts, a small stone cave emitted smoke, but these smoke instantly dispersed in the strong winds, as if they had never existed. Down a dozen meters along the passage of these smoke, there was a warm underground structure. At this moment, two Beyonders of the Tamara family were roasting sea fish they had caught during the day with their extraordinary abilities. In the inner room, Petty Tamara, with a sallow complexion, lay on a stone bed with his eyes closed. During the previous battle with the Creator, Petty's spirit body had sustained some injuries and needed time to recover. Suddenly, Petty opened his eyes and looked outside. The space there suddenly became illusory, and a 15 or 16-year-old boy, Erebus, whose complexion also didn't look very good, walked out of the spirit world. The injuries caused by Storm of Lord earlier had not yet healed. And behind him was Tamara, like a servant. The skin color of all members of this family tends to be sallow, and it's unknown if Tamara's is due to family heredity or if he is also feeling unwell somewhere. After the two of them appeared, the two family members who were roasting fish were about to get up when they were, imprisonment, in place by Tamara. Petty got up from the stone bed, stood at the entrance of the stone chamber, and stared coldly at the two uninvited guests, saying, "What are you doing here?" Tamara retorted, "Why didn't you meet up with us?" Petty smiled. "Before this, I never thought that in order to strike at us, you would even expose your hiding place of so many years to the Creator. You should know very well." Tamara said expressionlessly, "It was your lover Orsay who exposed our valley. I said long ago, she's just a slave, playing around is fine, but you actually fell in love." Petty scoffed, "You'll never understand, because you lost all humanity over 1,000 years ago." Then he said, "It's precisely because you lost your humanity that, in order to strike at us, you didn't hesitate to leave a demigod who supported you to guard the valley. Now you're happy, we're only left with a few people." Erebus suddenly interjected, "I'm very curious, why are you unwilling to believe in me?" "Why else? Because you are an evil god." Erebus said seriously, "Which deity isn't an evil god?" Petty looked at him coldly, "So none of us are willing to believe." Erebus shook his head, indicating his disappointment in Petty. Tamara continued, "I was too lenient with you before. Of course, this also has to do with the despicable 7 deities. If they hadn't killed my father back then because they needed the extraordinary characteristic of the Hand of Order, the Tamara family would not have split. Over the years, I've realized that our division is because there are 2 sequence 2s within the family, which gave you the confidence to oppose me. If my father were still alive, and there was a Hand of Order in the family, you would never have dared to start a civil war back then. Another reason is that the Abraham family people are too strong. These fools still thought that Mr. Dorr could protect them. Now it's good, the Creator helped me severely damage the forces of division, and I have the family's extraordinary characteristic reserves in my hand. Now I just need time to recultivate a group of family members. From now on, the Tamara family will be a unified family." As the patriarch, I can command all family members, and I no longer have to bicker with you through a council of dog shit. Petty looked at the sallow-faced Tamara, and he suddenly felt that the person in front of him was a bit unfamiliar. The stone chamber was silent for 2 or 3 seconds, and Petty finally said, "To achieve your goal, many of your followers have also died. Do you think it's worth it?" "Worth it," Tamara said. "They kept you stable, so you didn't leave the valley due to potential leaks. This was a necessary sacrifice. Of course, part of the reason is that we underestimated the power of the Creator." He paused and then continued, "Before this, we speculated that while the Creator's status seemed terrifying, he would have difficulty even dealing with a sequence to Beander. What we didn't expect was for the battle to end so cleanly and quickly, otherwise, we could have withdrawn some of our people." Petty added, "Then, as we discussed many times before, if the Creator knew our hiding place, he would immediately organize another extraordinary war, and we would definitely notice it. But from beginning to end, the Creator did not conduct a large-scale mobilization, which caused us to lower our guard." "But why were you so convinced that he would come? So you made so many preparations in advance?" Erebus answered him, "Because if he wanted to find me, the Tamara family was the only clue. However, what I didn't expect was that the Creator would attack in such a way. I originally wanted to take the opportunity to corrupt his subordinates, and based on his opportunities to remove the corruption from his subordinates, I would once again contend with him for the country of disorder. I didn't expect him to give me any chance at all." Petty nodded, "I understand." Tamara asked, "Do you have any other questions?" "Yes, when did you completely abandon your humanity?" Tamara said expressionlessly, "When I had no choice but to kill my own father with my own hands." Petty said calmly, "I have no more questions." Tamara said indifferently, "You can die in peace." Petty smiled, "You wouldn't think that my conversation with you just now was really just me wanting to chat, would you? You wouldn't think that since I've seen through your true colors, I wouldn't make any preparations, would you?" As he spoke, his figure became illusory. "Goodbye, both of you." Erebus watched Petty disappear with a smile, but in the next second, Petty reappeared in front of Erebus and Tamara. Petty was slightly stunned, then asked in great surprise, "What did you just do?" "Ha ha ha." Erebus first let out a few arrogant laughs before saying, "You wouldn't think that in your 2 battles with the Creator, you were barely suppressed by his status because of your own strength, would you? You wouldn't think that as long as you don't believe in me, as long as you don't come into contact with those mists, you won't be corrupted by me, would you?" He commented, "What a naive young man. Impossible." Petty fell into deep self-doubt. How could I not feel that I was corrupted?" "Of course you can't feel it." Erebus continued, "Because your surname is Tamara." Petty seemed to understand something. "My bloodline." Erebus smiled, "That's right, you were already my believer when you were born. Of course, your resistance also had some effect. Before this, I wasn't confident I could kill you. But now, thanks to the Creator injuring your spirit body, I have an excellent opportunity." He mimicked Petty's tone from earlier. "You wouldn't think that I was listening to your conversation just now because your chat content was interesting, would you?" As he spoke, Erebus took out a thin-necked glass bottle, and the mist inside glowed with colorful light. The Erebus in front of Petty became incredibly tall and majestic, and he involuntarily knelt on one knee. He struggled to resist, but this surrender seemed to have been buried in his bloodline for a very long time. At this moment, his submission to Erebus was as natural as eating and sleeping. Tamara stepped forward, holding a small black knife. He merely made a gesture towards the defenseless Petty, and Petty's head fell from his neck. But Petty was not dead. The head, rolling on the ground, still stared fixedly at Tamara. So Tamara reached out and patted Petty's shoulder. Petty's body collapsed at a visible speed. As a balancer, he could make everything around him return to balance, but he could also make the target lose balance. At this moment, Petty's body lost balance, so it quickly collapsed, but Petty was not dead, he had only lost the normal human form. Under the effect of Tamara's ability, the extraordinary characteristic within Petty began to precipitate. Petty had been resisting, but Erebus kept suppressing his bloodline with the mist in his hand, so Petty's resistance was not very effective. After more than 10 minutes, the extraordinary characteristic within Petty completely precipitated. Erebus reached out and picked up the extraordinary characteristic, letting out a long sigh of relief. Finally, I have it. I originally planned to send you to William I in a few days, but now I can prevent you from dying unexpectedly in Backland. At this time, Petty's body was still wriggling. His spirit and spirit body would only dissipate after a very long time. During this period, he was very likely to become a malevolent spirit. Erebus put away the extraordinary characteristic. It's a pity now is not a good time for promotion. Tamara said nothing, silently killing the two family members who had been grilling fish and had previously opposed him. In early November, Hobert stayed in the South Balam Duchy for a few more days, mainly to see how chaotic it had become. Although all the Earth King and generals in the duchy were placed under house arrest by Hobert and Anjou, Hobert did not use thunderous means to incorporate their armies or disband their bureaucratic systems. In the eyes of the Earth King and generals, the Duke's actions were extremely foolish. This gave their heirs and subordinates enough space to mobilize their forces and conspire with each other to jointly resist the Duke's rule. Hobert did this on purpose, of course. He now desperately needed a period of chaos to thoroughly digest the potion. Although a large-scale war broke out in the North Continent, Hobert found that the chaos caused by the war did not lead to any digestion of his potion. On the contrary, the chaos caused by the sneak attack on St. Milan and the chaos caused by the sale of telephones led to a certain degree of digestion of his potion. After Backland was bombed, people who had seen telephones rushed to install one in their homes so they could go to work with peace of mind. As soon as there was any disturbance, they would call home to ask about the situation. In addition, after the war began, the faster the information spread, the better. Direct verbal communication was much faster than the telegraph process, and it was also very accurate, allowing for repeated confirmation. For a time, stores selling telephones were packed, and after experiencing the Backland bombing, the dark clouds of fear had never dissipated from their hearts. At the same time, people also became very irritable. Many people who queued for a day but failed to buy a phone, in a fit of anger, beat up the phone salespeople, and some even wanted to set fires, but they were stopped. At the same time, conflicts between those in line were also very easy to occur. Although these chaotic events were small in scale, they allowed Hobert to continuously feel the feedback brought by the chaos. Hobert also realized that only chaos related to himself or caused by himself could allow the potion to be digested. At the same time, because he often acted arrogantly and his audience was either a demigod or an angel, the acting effect was very good. Currently, Hobert is in good condition, and he is only a little short of completely digesting the potion. However, what disappointed Hobert was that after the heirs of those Earth King and warlords united, even though their strength was not weak in the South Continent, they still sent envoys to negotiate with Hobert. This made Hobert realize, it is difficult for people who are used to kneeling to stand up again. So he simply cut off the envoy's ear and told the envoy to go back and tell those heirs that they were already traitors to the South Balam Duchy, and the duchy's army would wipe out their entire families. Hobert sighed. If these people continued to be cowardly, then he could only take the initiative to attack. But in that case, the level of chaos in the duchy would not be very severe, and it might not be possible to completely digest the potion. During these few days in the South Balam Duchy, Hobert also invited Georgina to observe the South Balam Duchy's army from afar and drive away the Battle of the Forsake Empire colonial army. Georgina was very satisfied with the duchy's reaction speed and finalized the transaction for purchasing the teleportation array blueprint with Hobert in Anjou City. Actually, there wasn't much to discuss. Everything that needed to be discussed had already been settled before, now it was just a reconfirmation. Hobert had originally planned to stay in the South Balam Duchy for a few more days, but Dofus used the teleportation array to report that Earl Vincent had invited Hobert to a ball 3 times in a row. The first 2 times, Dofus refused on the grounds that the Earl was on a business trip. The third time, it was Earl Vincent's youngest son, Karl, who extended the invitation and informed Dofus that many nobles in Backland had jointly invited Duke Hobert to attend the ball. And these nobles had one thing in common. Their children were either mid to low-level officials in Hobert's current territory or managers of the Earl of Light, all from the families of the noble children Hobert had recruited previously. Dofus immediately realized that these people might have formed a loose alliance, so he reported this news to Hobert. Hobert had only recruited a few batches of noble children before and stopped recruiting once the shortage of personnel passed, precisely because he was afraid of these people forming cliques. Now it seems that Hobert's concerns at the time were very prescient. Fortunately, their numbers were not large. If there were many of them, they might have formed interest groups. After all, this was the specialty of the Backland nobles. After some consideration, Hobert decided to attend this ball to listen to the demands of those noble children. In addition, he remembered a small matter. Viscount Glaint had asked him twice before to help retrieve a ring from his family, but Hobert had not found a suitable opportunity. This ball was a good time. So after Hobert returned to Backland, he first asked Viscount Glaint for a few strands of hair, and then, as promised, went to Earl Vincent's mansion to attend the ball. When Hobert got out of the carriage, many Earl and Viscount were waiting at the door, while Baron and Lord did not even have the qualification to welcome him. Hobert exchanged pleasantries with them, and everyone entered the ballroom together. It was then that Hobert realized that the noble children recruited several times before involved 70 or 80 nobles, both big and small. It took him more than half an hour just to greet each of them and exchange a few words. At this point, Vincent announced that the ball officially began. This Earl loved food very much, and the banquet he held was also a feast of delicacies. However, Hobert had no time to enjoy it this time. All his time was spent talking with the nobles. The main people who talked with Hobert were Earl Vincent, Earl Minnies, and a few other Earl, while other nobles surrounded them, listening to their conversation. Half a year ago, they never expected that those less favored offspring who sought their own paths with Hobert would provide them with a very good investment environment. After a long period of casual conversation, Earl Vincent, with his golden hair, finally said, "Duke, first of all, I want to thank you for taking care of the children over the past period. We heard some information about the South Balam Duchy from them, and in return, we are willing to help the duchy overcome its difficulties. Although the Ruined Kingdom's army has withdrawn from there, it doesn't mean that the Ruined Kingdom has completely lost its influence there. We all have more or less business dealings with those Earth Kings and warlords, and we can help you persuade them to stop the civil war and pledge allegiance to you again." Hobert immediately understood that they wanted to use the process of persuading those Earth Kings and warlords to turn the South Continent's original Ruined Kingdom agents into their own agents. So he smiled and said, "3 days ago, I just met with the envoys of the Earth King and warlords, and announced to them that they are already traitors to the South Balam Duchy." The faces of the several earls showed some surprise, and after 1 or 2 seconds of silence, Earl Minnies said, "Duke, won't that easily provoke them?" Hobert was stunned for a moment before realizing that he and these nobles were not on the same page. What he meant by that sentence was, "You don't need to worry, I will persuade them with guns and cannons, and when they all become corpses, the civil war will stop." But in the eyes of these nobles, things seemed to be getting worse and worse. Hobert recalled the surprised expressions of Earl Hall and his son when they heard his plan earlier. Backland's long-standing peace and pampered lifestyle had made them accustomed to solving problems in the most stable way. So Hobert said again, "In my opinion, this civil war must be fought." He then said seriously, "Sometimes stability is not a good thing, especially for a newly emerging country. It must appear a bit radical. If a country is like an old man who can't walk when it is just founded, then this country will have no vitality." The surrounding nobles were all stunned. The information they had received from their respective channels all indicated that Hobert had no chance of winning this civil war. After all, Hobert had only taken over Longtail Island for more than half a year and had no time to recruit and train a large number of soldiers. And because the confidentiality of Beander's power was very high, even Georgina did not know exactly how much Beander power Hobert had, and could only guess based on intelligence from the South Colson-Beander battle. The channels of these nobles could not be very clear about Hobert's Beander strength either. Many people believed that Hobert had become arrogant because he had achieved a great victory in the struggle with the Gas Association. Therefore, he made a wrong judgment of the situation, believing that the South Continent would still achieve great victories like in Backland. However, in the concept of the nobles, the South Continent was very barbaric, not at all like Backland, which had a solid system and moral framework. If problems were still solved in the South Continent using the methods used in Backland, it would easily make things uncontrollable. So they smelled a business opportunity, believing this was an excellent time to invest in the South Balam Duchy. However, Hobert's reaction was far beyond their expectations. At this time, a lord could not help but remind Hobert, "Duke, if the civil war completely breaks out, more interests may have to be sacrificed to make those Earth kings and generals continue to serve us." Hobert handed the wine glass in his hand to the attendant. "Excuse me, I need to go to the restroom." His timely display of impatience seemed to suggest that he disdained debating such matters with everyone. Led by the attendant, Hobert left the ballroom. The nobles first looked at each other, then, with a buzz, began to express their opinions volubly. Hobert came to the restroom and thought to himself, "I never thought that one day, I would also have to use Mr. Door's Divine Kingdom. In Earl Vincent's mansion, there would definitely be Beyonders protecting it, and Vincent himself might even be a Sequence 5, but for the current Hobert, slightly, altering the surrounding spirituality would allow them to completely fail to detect his actions." Then, Hobert took out a few strands of Viscount Glaine's hair and performed an association. This immediately allowed him to associate with the location of the ring. After all, Hobert's current operational range for various abilities had already reached 6 or 7 kilometers. He spread his spirituality and did not sense any signs of life around the ring. Instead, there seemed to be an extraordinary trap. Hobert used his ability to easily and temporarily disable that extraordinary trap. Almost at the same second, Hobert, through his distortion of space, twisted that ring, along with the container holding it, into his hand. It was a small wooden box made of solid wood, with no extraordinary protection. So Hobert made the space around the lock become chaos, easily allowing the copper lock to pass through the lock nose and remove the lock. Opening the box, inside were various gem rings. Apparently, Earl Vincent did not know about the ring passed down by the Glenant family, so he didn't take it seriously at all. Hobert picked up the gem ring that Viscount Glainet had mentioned, infused it with spirituality, and chanted the incantation in ancient Forsac language, Summer of Winter County. The area around the gem ring suddenly became illusory, and a small illusory space appeared. This was a small spatial magic, designed to be very concealed using gems and the characteristics of the door pathway Beyonder pathway, so it was no wonder Vincent had never discovered it. From this small space, Hobert took out a few notebooks, then put the ring back, closed the wooden box, and once again used the chaos of space to return the small lock to its original position. Finally, Hobert once again avoided that extraordinary trap and sent the wooden box back. After finishing all these actions, Hobert gently waved his hand, distortion, ing the air around the toilet flush switch, making that air push the switch. Whoosh! Hobert smiled. After becoming a Sequence 3, he had also become increasingly lazy. As Hobert finished washing his hands and took the servant's towel to dry them, the restroom door suddenly opened, and Earl Vincent's youngest son, Carl, came in from outside. "Lord." At this time, Carl's skin was rough and dark, and compared to more than a year ago, he was much more stable and mature. Hobert walked out while casually asking, "How's work lately?" "The town I'm in charge of ranked first in grain production among town-level units this quarter," Carl said with a smile, following behind. Hobert glanced at Carl. "That's very good." "Not bad, not bad," Carl said modestly. "We are all very grateful for the platform you provided for us." Originally, they were all marginalized figures in their families and were not valued. But in Hobert's territory, they found a way to realize their self-worth. At this time, Carl, due to his excellent political achievements, had already begun a new round of assessment, preparing for him to serve as a county magistrate in the South Balam Duchy. Another member of the Justice League, Kalati, was also not valued within her family, which even made her feel very insecure at one point. But in an assessment hosted by Donna, she saw Kalati's patience and meticulousness, so she gave her an opportunity. Kalati cherished that opportunity very much and thus gained a very crucial promotion. Currently, Kalati is the Director of Human Resources for Longtail Island City, the highest-ranking official among the noble children. At this time, Carl said again, "I'm very sorry, my father asked me some questions about Longtail Island before, and I really wanted them to know about the great changes happening on Longtail Island, so I answered all non-confidential questions. Just 2 days ago, my father suddenly asked me to return, and when I learned that Kalati and the others were also asked many questions about Longtail Island, I realized something was wrong. But at the time, I didn't expect that my father and they were actually planning to take advantage of this opportunity to infiltrate forces into the South LotM Duchy. At this point, the two stopped outside the ballroom. Carl said helplessly, they don't realize where their error is. They still hope to solve problems with their backland way of doing things. Please don't mind, after the ball, I will try to persuade my father. It's fine, Hobert said with a smile, just consider it a chance to taste the delicious food at Earl Vincent's mansion. He had originally thought that the noble children had asked Earl Vincent and others to help them secure higher official positions. It now seemed that it was just these nobles' habit of speculation, acting up, and noble children like Carl had not colluded with their elders. Although their connections were very close, they did not band together as Hobert had previously guessed. This made Hobert very satisfied, meaning that the transformation of these noble children was very successful. Returning to the ballroom, Earl Vincent and the others still wanted to discuss the issue of curbing the civil war in the South LotM Duchy with Hobert, but Hobert, citing hunger, went to enjoy the food there. After he finished eating and praised the culinary skills of Earl Vincent's mansion chef, he immediately took his leave. Although this was somewhat impolite, he was, after all, a Duke of Rouen. If he wanted to leave, no one had the right to stop him. In the ballroom, the nobles once again discussed how to make Hobert understand the seriousness of this civil unrest, and at the same time, they called their children from the corner of the ballroom to verify some information with them. It was then that they realized the atmosphere was a bit off, or rather, their children's eyes looked at them a bit strangely. These children, who were originally not valued, were very docile when they met their parents, and even after gaining a position under Hobert, they still treated them with great respect. But now, they saw disdain on the faces of these children. At this time, Carl said, "Gentlemen, you have made an error about one thing. We are confident in winning this civil war." A noble sneered, "War isn't just about confidence." Carl didn't say much, just said, "Let's wait and see." After speaking, he also left the ballroom, and the other noble children also left one after another. At this point, the nobles present realized that to gain benefits in the South LotM Duchy, they would have to use the channels of these children, so they also dispersed hastily. After Hobert returned to the Earl's mansion, he first went to his study to look at the notebooks that the Glenant family regarded as treasures. What Hobert did not expect was that this family was actually a branch of the Tamara family. To be precise, the origin of this family was an extraordinary family that escaped from the valley where the Tamara family was hiding more than 800 years ago, similar to Apton's situation. He thought to himself, no wonder the incantation to open the ring was, "Summer of Winter County." The valley where the Tamara family was hiding was in Winter County. And more than 800 years ago, this extraordinary family escaped from the family precisely in the summer. I wish everyone all the best, good luck, and a prosperous year of the dragon. Thank you for your support and love this past year. As the new year approaches, this book has finally entered the premium channel, putting a perfect end to the year. Author bows in gratitude for everyone's subscriptions. With this achievement, author can definitely brag to relatives and friends. In the blink of an eye, author has been a full-time novelist for 3 years. 3 years ago, due to the pandemic, author's workplace had intentions of layoffs, so everyone worked frantically to keep their jobs, which made author question the meaning of life for a time. After getting tired of the rat race, author decided to return to his hometown and restart his writing career. The first 2 years were not profitable. Besides writing web novels, he also contributed articles to magazines. At that time, author was considered unproductive by relatives. Generally, if there was anything to do at home, they would call author for help, because in their eyes, author was an idler. But this year is different. Author can support himself by writing books, and this is definitely something to brag about. *******. During the new year, the word count updated by author might be a bit less, but it's guaranteed not to be less than 6,000 words per day. Besides wanting to brag, it's also because the book has been open for 11 months without any holidays, and author is also a bit tired and needs to take a proper break. Finally, let's talk about next year's writing plan. According to author's plan, this book should conclude in May, as it's almost time for a Sequence 2 promotion. Starting from late February, some of author's previous foreshadowing will begin to converge. As for the plot, it is naturally to expand wildly during the North Continent War, continuing to nourish the South Balam Duchy with the wealth and technology of the North Continent. After the war ends, it can probably transform from a duchy into a kingdom, and then later become an empire. In terms of the main plot, Hobert will use the order clock to help Klein stabilize his state and deal with Aemon. And kill Erebus, obtain the method of the pillar from the Child of Chaos, and so on. Oh, right, also help old Huang. It's still the same old saying, although author's skill is limited, he will do his best to write this book well. This is the best way to repay everyone. Lastly, I wish everyone a happy new year again, and may everything go smoothly in the new year. Hobert continued to read the notes, which roughly describe the three factions of the Tamara family. The first faction, represented by Tamara, worships evil gods and willingly becomes their servants, hoping to regain the extraordinary characteristic of Hand of Order, and restore an archangel to the family. Another faction, led by Petty, strongly opposes family members worshipping evil gods, believing it would make Beyonders cold, especially family members above the demigod level, who might even become inhuman due to the evil god's influence. The internal conflict within the Tamara family mainly lies between these two factions. According to the notes, this conflict emerged very early on. When the elder Tamara had no choice but to offer his extraordinary characteristic to the six gods, Tamara began to establish contact with that evil god through clues about evil gods obtained by the family. Gradually, Tamara began to force family members to change their beliefs. Before this, family members generally worshipped the angel within the family, which was Tamara himself, so at first, he easily changed the beliefs of a group of members. However, there was still a group of members who might not have been so devout in their faith in Balancer, Tamara, and they were unwilling to convert. The seeds of internal family conflict were sown at this time. Later, Petty Tamara escalated the family's conflict, leading to civil war. Petty had always pretended to support Tamara and was highly trusted by Tamara, but this was all a facade he put on to gain an opportunity for advancement. After the Tamara family obtained the extraordinary characteristic of Duke of Entropy, Petty stood out among several candidates for promotion to angel and received the opportunity for advancement. Only then did he begin to openly oppose the worship of evil gods, and he quickly became the leader of the opposition. Thus, with both sides evenly matched in strength, a civil war broke out. Later, Tamara, who had a slight advantage, compromised, stating that family members had the right to choose whether or not to worship evil gods. Thus, the family council was formed, which is the highest decision-making body in the family. Only then were the rifts caused by the civil war barely mended. Additionally, there was another faction within the Tamara family. Initially, they were members of the Abraham family who had intermarried with the Tamara family and came to seek refuge with them. Some of them also left the Tamara family because they were unwilling to accept the protection of an evil god. It is said that they later sought refuge with the original witch. The person who wrote this note was also very curious as to why those members switched from one evil god to another. Hobert smiled, thinking to himself, evil gods are not all the same. The remaining Abraham family members who were willing to worship evil gods formed a relatively loose faction, which became the third faction within the Tamara family. They once hoped to cultivate an angel of the apprentice pathway, but unfortunately, they could not complete the corresponding rituals. Therefore, this faction has always had only 2 or 3 demigods and has never produced an angel. Through continuous intermarriage thereafter, they were almost diluted by the other 2 factions, but they have always been the mediators for the other 2 factions. Combining some previously obtained intelligence, Hobert basically understood the entire history of the Tamara family. This family rose to prominence in the chaotic decades of the early 4th epoch, later joined the Solomon Empire, and gained Solomon's deep trust, secretly helping Solomon contact the uncertain mist and seek methods to become an old one. After the Solomon Empire collapsed, the 6 gods seized the Tamara family's extraordinary characteristic of Hand of Order. To seek revenge and restore their strength, Tamara completely turned to the uncertain mist. In Hobert's view, a family sustained by hatred is very difficult to last long. The civil war of the Tamara family, in addition to their conflicting ideologies regarding evil gods, fundamentally stemmed from whether or not to live for hatred. The family members led by Petty firmly resisted the worship of the uncertain mist precisely because they did not want their lives to become sacrifices for revenge. Hobert sighed, what a pity. With the arrival of Erebus, the balance between the two factions of the Tamara family might be broken. He continued to read. Petty, in order to protect some family members, would help them conceal their whereabouts and leave the family if they voluntarily wished to do so. That is how the Glenant family came to be. That Beander family first lay dormant for decades before beginning to operate in the outside world again. At this time, a series of wars broke out on the North Continent. The ruined kingdom first engaged in the 20 Years' War with the Forsake Empire, and then the White Rose War with the Intis Kingdom. The Glenant family used these two wars to obtain their noble title, which has been passed down to the present day. The subsequent notes were unremarkable, basically recording the lives of generations of viscounts. On the last page of the notes, a few hastily written words read, "Remember, do not investigate the cause of my death. That will likely invite retaliation from the royal family. Be a good viscount and keep the family going. As long as there is continuity, there is hope." Although this sentence was a bit disjointed, combined with Grelint's previous narration, it should have been written by his father to him. Hobert thought of Rex and smiled slightly. For many people, the truth coming to light is not the most important thing. Then he thought, the old Viscount Glaint might have known about the royal family excavating ancient tombs but was unwilling to collude with the royal family, which led to his assassination by the royal family. However, unlike Hugh's family, Grelint's family was not purged. Perhaps the old Viscount Glaint never intended to inform the church about this matter, he merely refused to help the royal family. It could also be the result of Vincent's mediation. From some previous events, it seems that Earl Vincent did provide some help to Grelint, very likely quietly helping his good friend's family through difficult times. If Vincent had always been wary of Grelint, he would not have allowed his young son Karl to associate with Grelint. Of course, this was just Hobert's guess. The behavior of these nobles is often difficult to explain. In addition to the records of the Glenant family's history, there were two other notebooks. One of them recorded many extraordinary knowledge and theories. This should be the standard equipment for a Beander family. Having such a notebook is enough for their descendants to understand this extraordinary world well. The other one recorded many extraordinary histories, especially detailed information about families of adjacent or the same sequence, and even actively conducted some investigations. Hobert glanced at them and found that this information about Beander families was outdated. The description of Trensust still stated, divided into two, one branch is hidden somewhere in the Hornassus Mountains, and one branch is relatively active, having established a law firm in Backland to digest their potion. Decades ago, these descriptions were accurate, but now significant changes have occurred. Especially after the Creator began to systematically incorporate Trensust family members, this intelligence became basically useless. Another reason was that Grelint chose to become a pharmacist to avoid further surveillance, so this information was equivalent to information from other pathways for him. However, if Grelint has children in the future and wants to return to the arbitrator pathway, this information will still be useful, at least to know which families are of the same or adjacent pathways. After finishing these notes, Hobert sent them to Grelint. In Viscount Glaint's study, the young Viscount gazed at the three leather notebooks for a long time in silence. He carefully caressed their covers, as if fearing they would break from his overly rough movements. Hobert knew that over the years, these notes embodied all of Grelint's longing for his father. After a long while, Viscount Glaint said with a slight choke, "Sorry, I was distracted just now." As he spoke, he opened the secret room in the study and took out 3 sealed artifacts from inside. "According to our previous agreement, you can choose any one of them." Hobert nodded and casually picked one. They were all Sequence 2 sealed artifacts, and he currently had little need for sealed artifacts of this level. However, the help of a demigod was more valuable than a Sequence 2 sealed artifact, so Hobert did not stand on ceremony with Grelint. "We must face the future, not the past," Hobert said with a smile. "Look forward. A bright future awaits us. If we only look back, we can only be buried by helplessness and sorrow, because we are powerless to change what has passed." Grelint forced a smile. "Thank you." Hobert waved his hand at him and used travel to return to his study. At this moment, scenes from the past year flashed through his mind like a movie. He thought of the Tamara family, his mother, his father, his adoptive parents, Furs and Audrey, Donna and Tyrone, Klein and Leonard. All of this ultimately transformed into a smile. Time really flies. That night, Hobert barely rested. He first reflected on his life, then began to make short-term and long-term plans. Thinking about these things often made him excited, so he couldn't get a good rest. The next morning, Hobert first went to Earl's Light to check on the sales of telephones. Preparations for telephone sales had begun very early. In some places, telephone lines were laid at the same time as electrical wires. Even in places where telephone lines had not been laid, it was relatively easy to lay them as long as there were utility poles. However, there were still many areas not covered by telephone lines, so the current constraint on telephone development was the insufficient laying of telephone lines. This could not be rushed and could only be laid gradually. After having lunch with Audrey, Hobert went to Longtail Island in the afternoon to attend the Tarot Club with Furs. Before today, Hobert had attended the Tarot Club 3 times, but those meetings were very brief, and nothing new happened. As usual, Hobert and Furs lay on the bed a few minutes early. Furs said, "Dorian accepted my invitation and plans to visit Longtail Island tomorrow." Hobert nodded, "All right, in that case, I'll stay on Longtail Island these 2 days." Furs added, "In Tutelka Port, some Navy personnel appeared, recruiting pirates to participate in a naval battle. They promised land and official positions, and even noble titles. Let them recruit," Hobert said. "As long as it doesn't affect the port's order, don't interfere. After all, Longtail Island nominally belonged to the Ruin Kingdom." Furs nodded, "Okay." Hobert then asked, "I haven't been to Longtail Island for a long time. How is the construction of Longtail Island during this period? Are the industrial zones all operating normally? We have already repaired the most dangerous section of the dam and built a large number of canals and sub-canals, almost eliminating flood disasters." Furs now knew everything about Longtail Island like the back of her hand. With a large number of skilled workers recruited from Janai's southern shore, all factories have basically started operating. The only problem is that we haven't found suitable buyers for the goods produced by our heavy industry. Hobert smiled and said, "It's not time yet. When the factories on the South Continent also start operating, we will be able to absorb a part of the production capacity ourselves. In addition, with the development of the war, perhaps by next year at the latest, we will be able to export some industrial products back to the North Continent. Of course, the premise is that we have enough for ourselves." Just as they were discussing this, their vision was suddenly covered by a layer of gray mist. The next second, they appeared in the Giant's Hall, on both sides of the bronze long table. While the two were slightly stunned, Justice Audrey slightly lifted her skirt and bowed to the top, saying, "Good afternoon, Mr. the Fool." This clear greeting also signaled the official start of this Tarot Club meeting. Audrey greeted the others while habitually observing. First, she noticed that the dense mist around Mr. the Fool was even denser and more agile. Audrey was delighted, as this usually meant that Mr. the Fool's abilities had further recovered. Hobert also noticed this. Unlike Audrey, who was polite, he directly glanced at the Fool, Klein. The Fool was indeed more profound, as if he was a distant phantom. This made Hobert realize Klein had advanced to Sequence 3. Audrey, who continued to greet the other members, also noticed that the hermit's mental state and body language indicated that she was worried about certain things. Audrey pondered the possible reasons with a slight curiosity. Is it related to the mysterious queen? Or is it another problem? With Audrey's further advancement, she had already drawn a psychological portrait of the hermit through observation, believing her to be a rather contradictory Beander. Most of the time, she looked experienced, knowledgeable, calm, and capable, but for some reason, in certain aspects, she was bold and reckless, like an underage girl. Based on the analysis of some basic information, Audrey believed that the hermit's personality should be related to the mysterious queen. Meanwhile, Hermit, Catalia, sitting below, Magician, Furs, had 2 questions echoing in her mind. Why did the queen send so many diaries all at once? Is the queen in some kind of predicament? Finally, enduring until the meeting officially began, Catalia reined in her worries and said to the Fool, "Great Mr. the Fool, I have collected an entire volume of Rosal's diary this time. An entire volume. Upon hearing Hermit's words, the Hanged Man, Alger and several other members were visibly stunned. Even the son, Derek, who was least concerned about such matters and most obtuse, sensed a hint of abnormality. The other members knew that the mysterious Queen Bernadette was Emperor Rosal's eldest daughter, so it was perfectly normal for her to provide an entire diary. What was abnormal was the act of giving an entire volume at once. Catalia ignored everyone's gazes and continued, "These diaries are not continuous, but they all originate from Emperor Rosal's later years." "Very good." Klein nodded slightly, signaling that the hermit could begin to materialize them. Page after page of slightly yellowed diaries successively formed, quickly covering an entire book. Fortunately, Catalia had already advanced to a demigod, and her pathway was related to knowledge. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for her to forcibly memorize so many diaries. After Klein received the diary, he casually flipped through it without truly reading it, then put it down and said to Catalia, "You may ask your questions. Including the ones accumulated before, you have a total of 10 questions." Catalia suddenly felt a headache, because the mysterious Queen Bernadette had only asked her to pose 2 questions this time. She pondered for a moment and then said, "Respected Mr. the Fool, can I ask them in batches?" "You may," Klein said with a smile. This aligned with his own thoughts. Answering 10 questions in one go would also be a very difficult task for Mr. the Fool. Catalia secretly breathed a sigh of relief and said, "There are 2 questions this time. One is, when George III becomes a god, will Adam himself help George III?" Alger and the others were stunned. According to the clues previously obtained from the Emperor, George III's apotheosis was significantly associated with Adam, and it even seemed to have been orchestrated by him. Then, when George III's plan was obstructed, wouldn't it be normal for Adam to help George III? At this moment, Klein thought to himself, the mysterious queen and I thought alike. The war has already broken out, and Adam should be waiting for the opportune moment to become a god. From some evidence, Adam's cooperation with George III may have ended, because their respective goals have basically been achieved. The start of the war is equivalent to Adam having the opportunity to become a god. And George III also gained the opportunity to become a god because of Adam's plan. Theoretically speaking, they no longer have any need to continue cooperating. One piece of evidence is that I successfully killed Chunnas and found the hidden royal ruins. Although in the end, due to someone's tip-off, the specific royal conspiracy was not discovered, if Adam was still very concerned about George III's apotheosis, I should have lost track of Chunnas due to various coincidences at that time. There is much similar evidence. Adam should not have much thought to manage George III's affairs at this time. At most, he would only send his subordinates to help. Klein believed that the mysterious queen should have also thought of these things based on her own knowledge of mysticism, and thus wanted to confirm them with the Fool. Although he was quite confident in his conjecture, he still didn't speak too definitively. From the current situation, Adam should not provide too much help to George III. If Adam provided a lot of help, then it would mean the situation had changed, not that the Fool's information was problematic. Regarding the Fool's answer, all members except Hobert were a bit confused. He wouldn't provide too much help. Alger was the first to react, seemingly understanding the Fool's meaning. The others were desperately recalling information about Adam, and each had their own associations. Catalia controlled her chaotic thoughts and spoke again. The second question is, where might the Emperor's undiscovered secret mausoleum be located? Furs suddenly sat up straight. A secret mausoleum. Undiscovered. This was definitely a best-selling topic with popular elements. Audrey, on the other hand, keenly discerned another matter from this question. Rosal's eldest daughter might have been continuously tracing the clues left by Rosal, hoping to find leads for the Emperor's resurrection. Because Hobert had not previously disclosed the specific process of the Black Emperor's resurrection, she could only think this far and was unaware of the purpose of those mausoleums. Leonard was more concerned. Rosal also left a secret mausoleum. I wonder what's inside. Klein had long been prepared for this. He smiled and said, perhaps in the Fog Sea, on the hidden primitive islands or in the abyss that Rosal once discovered. Abyss. Alger recalled the information about the abyss that he had traded with the Emperor before. Wasn't that place affected or contaminated by something unknown? Oh, right, Emperor Rosal was also contaminated by an outer god. It's very likely that the emperor built a mausoleum there because he was affected by some influence. It took Catalya several seconds to recover. She hadn't expected Emperor Rosal's secret mausoleum to involve the abyss. But after thinking carefully, she realized that it was not surprising for a struggle of that level to involve anything. For a moment, she wished the queen would stop investigating this matter, but she ultimately suppressed the thought, because she felt that if it were her, she would likely make a similar choice. These thoughts flashed by, and Catalya said, "Thank you for your answer. I have no more questions today." Hobert looked around, smiling to himself and thinking, "I can tell from your expressions that you perfectly avoided the correct answer." Klein nodded slightly at Catalya's thanks. "You may begin." Hobert immediately spoke, "I wish to have a private conversation with the world." The fool nodded lightly, creating a private space for them to converse. Hobert said to the world, "Didn't I say before that I hoped to get your help when lifting the family curse? The situation has become more complicated than before. I now need Mr. the Fool's help." For a moment, Klein wondered if Hobert had discovered that he was training a side account. Otherwise, why didn't Hobert directly request Mr. the Fool's help? Instead, he sought the world. But thinking that he had not made any oversights so far, he asked, "Why don't you directly pray to Mr. the Fool?" Hobert had long been prepared for this. "I'm not sure to what extent Mr. the Fool's power has recovered." Klein, of course, knew that Hobert's concerns were actually meant for the fool. He thought to himself, "Fortunately, I have been maintaining the illusion that the fool is awakening." Also, in such matters, Hobert is quite reliable. He knows to convey his request to the fool through the world, leaving the fool with enough leeway. So he manipulated the world and said, "Please state your request, and I will convey it to the fool." "Thank you," Hobert said. "I learned from the great, the creator, that the fool possesses the authority of grafting. Can my bloodline be grafted onto an unfamiliar life form?" I remember mentioning before that the curse on me involves the Night Emperor and Blood Moon Queen, one at the true god level and one at the archangel level. This was also why Hobert did not seek help from the old man inside Leonard. After all, although that old man was currently at sequence 1, he was very weak and could barely deal with Amon's angel-level avatar, making it difficult for him to perform similar operations. Klein had the world say, "I will report this matter to the fool after the gathering ends." At the same time, he had already begun to ponder this question inwardly. He first sighed, "The Creator has a very detailed understanding of the diviner pathway. After my advancement, I indeed gained an ability similar to grafting by utilizing this gray fog." Then Klein thought again, "However, the abilities I currently possess are very limited. The curse on Hobert likely involves the true god level. Even if I use a blasphemy card, I can probably only exert sequence 2 level power, so it will likely be difficult to help Hobert." However, these thoughts were not suitable for immediate expression. Klein manipulated the world to bring up another matter. "I have already found a pair of blessed dog's eyes for you. We can complete the blasphemy card transaction now." When he was searching for the main ingredient of the ancient scholar's potion, as soon as he arrived near Source Castle, he encountered a group of blessed dogs. They looked very docile and seemed to have sensed that he was the current master of Source Castle. The blessed dogs voluntarily offered a pair of eyes. When Klein somewhat awkwardly indicated that he needed another pair, the blessed dogs paused slightly, but 2 different blessed dogs still provided Klein with another pair. At a tarot club meeting 2 or 3 months ago, Klein and Hobert had reached a deal for the Tyrant card. Klein needed to exchange a pair of blessed dog's eyes for this blasphemy card. Klein's main reason for trading for this card was to suppress the Sea God Scepter. Currently, due to its strong negative effects, the Sea God Scepter could only be used gray fog above. With the Tyrant card, further sealing could be done, allowing it to be used in the real world for a minute or 2. Another use was to summon himself while holding the Tyrant card and using the Sea God Scepter. By utilizing the power of the gray fog, the Sea God Scepter could be completely suppressed for a period of time. Hobert nodded, "Okay, after the gathering ends, I will immediately report this matter to the Creator." At this point, he suddenly thought of a question. My prediction might be inaccurate. When I held the Black Emperor card, I already possessed an extremely high status very early on. That was because I was a Beyander of the Black Emperor pathway, held the Black Emperor card, and utilized the power of Country of Disorder, the source material corresponding to this pathway. That's why the creator could possess such a high status. But Klein is different. He doesn't have the Fool card or a Blasphemy card from an adjacent pathway. The Blasphemy card can only play a limited role in Source Castle, so it can only give Klein approximately one higher sequence of ability Grey Fog above. At this moment, Hobert suddenly realized that the Fool might not be able to help much in his advancement process. Although all 22 Blasphemy cards are theoretically at the same level, from the point of view that different cards can attract the extraordinary characteristic of their corresponding pathway, in the hands of a Beyander of the same pathway, it often has more miraculous effects. Thinking of this, Hobert couldn't help but sigh. Do I have to wait until Klein advances to sequence 2 before I can advance? By then, the war will be over. Hobert had no good ideas for this at the moment and could only think about it slowly after the gathering ended. As the private conversation between the two ended, Magician Furs immediately said, I hope to trade information about places with unique customs or cultures with everyone. Each piece of information is £50. She had recently discovered while role-playing as a recorder that the more customs and local cultures that were beyond her comprehension or felt novel to her, the faster she could digest the potion. She usually spent her afternoons handling matters on Longtail Island or South Colson, or going to other islands to digest the potion. In the evenings, she would spend a lot of time reading magazines or playing cards. It would be too time-consuming to search for islands with unique customs herself. Morning. What morning? Isn't the morning for sleeping in and lounging in bed? The Hanged Man, Alger smiled and said, there are too many such places. I know of an island that worships a strange deity, seemingly called the God of Sea Beasts. The image of this deity is just a head wearing a hat. He asked, does that count as a unique custom? Furs said, yes, of course it does. Please be more specific. That island is roughly between the Fog Sea and the Raging Sea, called Sarapo Island, Alger said. Remember to take off your hat when you go there. This is a local custom. The locals believe that if the deity wears a hat, then it is disrespectful to the deity for ordinary people to also wear hats. Then Alger continued, there's also a cannibal tribe with very peculiar customs. They also worship a strange deity, leading to many strange customs. He spoke of 3 islands with strange customs, and, Hermit, Catalia also mentioned 2 similar islands. This broadened the horizons of the other members, who marveled that such peculiar customs existed. After they completed this transaction, Hobert reminded Furs, do not deeply explore those deities, and even less, do not follow and worship those deities. Alger paused slightly before asking, are these wild gods problematic? In his opinion, these wild gods were basically demigods in poor condition. As long as one maintained a distance, there shouldn't be any problems. This was precisely why Hobert wanted to remind Furs at the Tarot Club. He was actually also reminding Alger and others. I don't know, but in my opinion, these wild gods are either high sequence beyonders in very poor condition, or they are simply outer gods. To avoid being affected or corrupted, it's best not to participate in local sacrifices, and not to casually approach those idols. Upon hearing the word, outer god, Alger asked with some concern, if I only inquired about information regarding those gods, would I be affected? Hobert said, probably not. Alger secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you for your reminder. Hobert smiled, indicating it was nothing. Furs then asked, what if I just record the stories of these deities, or the customs formed under the influence of these deities? This question could actually be asked privately, but Furs wanted to know the answer immediately, so she simply asked it on the spot. Hobert replied, it's also fine, but it's best not to record their images or overly specific information. Many other members realized that Miss Magician was digesting the recorder potion. Alger felt the most emotional, because even Magician was starting to impact Sequence 5, while he himself remained at that level. Emperor, the World, and Hermit were already Sequence 4, and Justice, the Sun, the Moon, and Star were all already Sequence 5. Only Magician was a lower sequence than him. Alger felt a lump in his chest that was hard to get rid of, wishing he could immediately go with Emperor, to explore the ruins left by the elf. However, at the last gathering, he brought this up again, and, Emperor, said he was very busy lately and would only be able to explore that ruin together after some time. To be safe, he could only wait a little longer. After this transaction was completed, the hall briefly fell silent. This also indicated the end of the transaction segment, and everyone began free communication. Hobert was the first to speak. I may issue some tasks to everyone in the near future. Please make the necessary preparations. In previous Tarot Club meetings, Klein and Catalia each owed Emperor 1 demigod-level task, while other members owed 3 sequence 5-level tasks. The civil war in the South Balam Duchy could break out at any time. If 2 demigods and several sequence 5 helpers suddenly appeared, it would have an unexpected effect. However, the premise was that the Rose School wanted to take the opportunity to participate in the internal strife of the South Balam Duchy. Otherwise, with the Beander forces organized by those Earth King and warlords, Hobert could eliminate them all while enjoying hotpot and singing. And in Hobert's view, the Rose School would definitely participate, because the Highland Kingdom was adjacent to the South Balam Duchy. If they weren't fools, they would understand that if the South Balam Duchy was given enough time to grow strong, they would definitely be threatened. After all, this duchy had intricate ties with the Creator, and the Rose School had been at war with the Creator before, making them enemies. The Moon, Emlyn asked, Mr. Emperor, what kind of tasks will they be? Hobert replied, striking at the Rose School, or carrying out assassination operations in the South Continent. He paused and added, I will provide you with a way to the South Continent or corresponding magical items. The other members paused slightly, they were all willing to accept such tasks. Then Leonard asked, I've heard some news that there's going to be civil unrest in the South Balam Duchy. Is that true? Yes, Hobert smiled. We are going to strike at the power of the local warlords. Catalia and Alger both paused slightly. They had also heard news about the South Balam Duchy long ago. It was inherently abnormal for a duchy to be established under the contemporary political system. They just hadn't immediately understood the relationship between Emperor and the South Balam Duchy. But after a moment of thought, they realized the reason for this anomaly. This principality was the Rune royal family's bribe to the Creator's forces. Catalia realized, I should have thought of it sooner. Longtail Island is Hobert's fief, and the South Balam Principality is Duke Hobert's fief. Perhaps Hobert is the Emperor himself. And Mr. Starr clearly knew this, which is why he directly asked the Emperor about the South Balam Principality. Alger thought to himself, such a bribe is normal. After all, since the South Colson campaign, the Creator's forces have been a non-negligible power in the Beander world. As long as this power does not side with Ruin's enemies, allowing them to establish a principality in the South Continent is a very cost-effective deal. Currently, the South Balam Principality is legally subordinate to the Rune royal family, which is equivalent to labeling this principality. At this time, Leonard asked again, are you planning to support a new batch of agents? We plan to govern that land ourselves, Hobert explained, that's why we have to eradicate all the original forces. Leonard then said, I don't understand politics, but I want to remind you that your actions make the church believe that they are causing chaos and increasing casualties in the local order. Hobert smiled. That's because the bishops of the church don't know how many slaves die unnatural deaths every year. Speaking of this, he paused slightly before saying, I understand. After the gathering, I will take some time to talk to the church. I will build more Church of the Night Goddess churches in the South Balam Principality. Oh, and also Earth Mother Church, Storm Church, and Church of Steam and Machinery churches. I believe that when I tell the bishops of the various churches about the idea of building churches, they will understand our actions. Hobert sincerely said to Leonard, thank you for your reminder. Leonard was stunned. I didn't mean that. I just wanted to remind you that the church is highly concerned about this matter. Well, it seems I really don't understand politics. At this time, the world asked, will a civil war break out? Probably, Hobert said. The world nodded and said nothing more. Alger was a little strange. Why is there such a deep conflict with the local warlords? Theoretically, those warlords in the South Continent should have been completely tamed by the colonial army. To put it simply, it's a matter of sovereignty. Hobert said, imagine in the Storm Church, there's an archpriest who only needs to hand over a certain amount of wealth each year to do whatever he wants in his diocese, treating and selling followers as slaves, collecting taxes from them, and so on, and the headquarters of the Storm Church has no right to interfere. Do you think such a thing could happen in the Storm Church? Alger understood the Emperor's meaning. No. He originally wanted to remind the Emperor that the situation in the colonies was different from the North Continent, and it was impossible to effectively manage the indigenous people and natives. But he thought of what he had seen and heard on Longtail Island, and finally said nothing. At this time, Catalia thought of another matter. I remember at a previous gathering, we discussed Ruin's sneak attack on the capital of the Forsake Empire. I just received news that the overall planner of that operation seemed to be Hobert. Was that also an operation dominated by the Creator's forces? At a previous gathering, they had indeed discussed this matter, but only for a few sentences, and Hobert hadn't even had time to show off the results of that battle. That's right, Hobert smiled, that was our first cooperation with the Rune royal family. Catalia nodded. So, in this war, you are on Ruin's side. Hobert did not make a clear statement, we just cooperated with Ruin once. Emlyn was more concerned about another issue. Mr. Emperor, I heard that the bombing of St. Milan caused very serious losses to the Forsake Empire. Is that true? Hobert shook his head. That's a rumor. According to the accurate intelligence I later received, the Forsake Empire's losses were not significant. The number of deaths was even single digits, and it hardly affected their industrial production. Emlyn frowned. I knew it, I shouldn't believe the news in the newspapers. Then he said somewhat strangely, but I heard, why did the Forsake Empire's newspapers also report that this sneak attack caused them huge losses? Last week, there happened to be several vampires from the Forsake Empire who came to Backland to support the assassination of original Moon believers, so he received some first-hand news from the Forsake Empire. I also heard about this, Hobert explained. This should be a propaganda tactic by the Forsake Empire to make the soldiers and people on the front line hate Ruin even more. In addition, this war was, after all, the Forsake Empire attacking Ruin. Their logistics supply line is longer. If supplies are not delivered, they can completely explain to the soldiers on the front line that it is because of Ruin's bombing that supplies are scarce. Hobert smiled. They completely shirk responsibility. Emlyn was stunned. That's very much like something politicians would do. These words made the other members nod in agreement. Alger then said, I read Ruin's newspaper, which said that this sneak attack only involved 24 airships, and 8 returned, right? Hobert replied, yes. Catalia, like Alger, was somewhat surprised. How did you do that? Even if the angels of the Forsake Empire were not in St. Milan, they should have been able to return within a few minutes. Did the Creator also dispatch angel-level power? There was nothing to hide about this information, so Hobert said, although there were several demigods in the airship fleet, they could at most withstand one round of attack from the Forsake Empire's angels. At a critical moment, the Creator transferred the airship fleet to the Intersea, so they escaped danger. Everyone was stunned, feeling that the Creator had clearly sided with Ruin, otherwise he would not have intervened. Hobert smiled. I know what everyone is thinking, but there's one thing you also need to be clear about. Most of the Beyonders in this operation were elites loyal to the Creator. Although the Tony family had not yet been incorporated, Hobert was very clear that their incorporation would not encounter any obstacles. If the Creator had not intervened at that time, even demigod-level Beyonders would have been very dangerous, which would have gone against Hobert's original intention. After all, for him, a very important purpose of this operation was to allow an iron-blooded knight to complete his advancement. In the end, all 3 demigods of the Tony family died, so what advancement was there? That would have been completely sending extraordinary characteristic to the Forsake Empire. But Hobert also knew that such things were difficult to explain clearly, and the Creator's intervention had already brought some benefits, so he simply did not provide a detailed explanation. At this time, at the Tarot Club, although Hobert did not explicitly say so, everyone could guess that the price offered by the Rune royal family was generous enough to not only invite the elites of the Creator's forces but even allow the Creator to personally intervene. This topic ended there, and the hall was quiet for a few seconds before Emlyn's gaze fell on Mr. Starr. If you were official Beyonders, how would you deal with a hostile clergyman within your jurisdiction during wartime? He hasn't done anything bad and doesn't plan to. The Fenaport kingdom had not yet declared war on Ruin, but everyone knew that this old rival of the Rune royal family was waiting for an opportunity, and a declaration of war was only a matter of time. The shadow of war made the believers and people around the Harvest Church look at Bishop Utravsky with increasing disapproval. The other members almost simultaneously thought, actually, Mr. Moon could remove, if. Leonard thought for a moment and said, protective custody. If Emlyn hadn't brought this up, he would have forgotten that there was a Harvest Church in Backland. Klein couldn't help but smile inwardly when he heard Leonard's answer. This answer is very spiritual, worthy of being the newly promoted Red Glove squad leader. After hearing the answer, Emlyn just slowly nodded, saying nothing. After answering Emlyn's question, Leonard turned to bring up the question he wanted to discuss. Is there anything else major hidden in Backland recently? The Backland Great Bombing and the King becoming a god were major events in Backland, but Leonard was not particularly concerned about either of them. This was a typical clergyman's perspective, believing that those were matters of secular power. But just 2 days ago, Pale's Zoroaster within Leonard reminded him that there were still hidden dangers in Backland. Leonard was not clear about what the hidden dangers were, so he decided to ask the other members at the Tarot Club. Klein pondered for a few seconds before having the world say, the leader of the secret order, the Sequence 1 angel, Emperor Rosel's old friend Cheritu, is currently hidden in Backland. Seeing that some members of the Tarot Club were still a bit confused, the world added, the conservation of extraordinary characteristics we often talk about usually refers to the conservation of extraordinary characteristics in adjacent pathways. In other words, the extraordinary characteristic aggregation law also exists in adjacent pathways. Leonard seemed to understand what the old man meant, or thief and diviner adjacent pathways. He thought to himself, the old man must have felt Cheritu's threat, which is why he issued the warning. When Hobert previously announced the relevant information about these two adjacent pathways, Leonard had not yet joined the Tarot Club, so he was unaware of it. The world frankly replied, yes, and there's also an apprentice pathway. At this time, Hobert reminded, this also means that Cheritu is very likely to attract Amon's high sequence clone to Backland. The other members were all stunned, especially Leonard. I hadn't thought of that. He sighed inwardly. How many clones does Amon have? The members of the Tarot Club had not expected that although the Backland bombing had ended, this international metropolis was becoming increasingly turbulent. Not only did a Sequence 1 Archangel of the Diviner Pathway arrive, but this Archangel was also very likely to attract an Amon's clone. Star, Leonard asked, why did that Archangel of the Diviner Pathway appear in Backland? Klein, manipulating the world, replied, it seems to be related to the Black Knight Goddess's plan. Leonard was even more bewildered. What plan does the goddess have? The other members were also stunned, very curious about what plan the Black Knight Goddess might have. Among them, Justice, Audrey suddenly realized, unconsciously, our discussions about deities and their plans have become so commonplace. The Hanged Man, Alger, on the other hand, realized the difference in this matter. Previously, we also exchanged intelligence about deities, but those were basically events that happened in the last epoch, or several epochs ago, whereas this time, it's about a plan currently being carried out by a deity. I'm not entirely sure about the specifics, the world said. But based on my observations, the Black Knight Goddess seems to want to make Backland chaotic. Based on previous prayers, Klein keenly noticed that the goddess seemed unable to descend recently. As for why she couldn't descend, he speculated it might be due to accommodating the uniqueness of the death pathway, but he wasn't sure about his guess, only feeling that this idea was more reasonable. Regarding the goddess's plan, Klein's guess was that the arrival of Cheritu and Amon's clone might be because the Black Knight Goddess feared her inability to descend would be discovered by enemies, so she made Backland chaotic, which would somewhat hinder the actions of the goddess's enemies in Backland. What Klein couldn't figure out was that the goddess seemed to have prevented Cheritu from advancing to Sequence 1 before, and the Church of the Night Goddess's attitude towards Amon's clone wasn't very friendly. Letting these two guys come would indeed cause a certain degree of chaos in Backland's Beander world, but there's also a high possibility that they might discover that the Black Knight Goddess has been unable to descend for some time, right? At the Tarot Club, Hobert, who had read the script, was very clear. The goddess now wished the whole world knew she couldn't descend. As for the reason for not being able to descend, it was, of course, attempting to accommodate the uniqueness of the death pathway. It didn't matter if others believed it or not, as long as it gave the god of war enough urgency. Regarding the world's words, everyone had their own guesses, but none seemed to grasp the main point. So they habitually looked at Emperor together, and Hobert smiled. Recently, our focus has been on the South Continent, and we don't know much about the situation in Backland. He then added, even if I were in Backland, that's a deity's plan. How could Beyonders like us understand it? I suggest we wait for this kind of thing. When the goddess's plan eventually yields results, we will naturally be able to roughly guess the goddess's plan through some actions of the Church of the Night Goddess. Everyone smiled helplessly. Of course, they understood, Emperor's meaning, this is a deity's plan. As ordinary Beyonders, should they even participate in a deity's plan? Soon, Alger started a new topic. From what I've observed, the Storm Church isn't too active in this war. Klein was somewhat surprised. Not too active. This doesn't fit the Storm Church's image. Although their doctrine neither advocates combat nor promotes war, they absolutely emphasize treating enemies with storm-like severity and immediately unleashing any anger they feel. But then he thought, the Sailor pathway and the Reader pathway are adjacent pathways that can be interchanged at high levels, with significant conflicts between them. Even if the Storm of Lord tacitly allowed George III to become the Black Emperor, he would unlikely sit idly by and watch Adam ascend to godhood through the tide of the era. Therefore, the Storm Church is unwilling to expand the war into a worldwide conflict. Klein thought of the sailors who were trying hard to restrain themselves and sighed inwardly, it must be difficult for them. Hobert responded to Alger, this is normal. After all, sailors cannot possibly support the Reader's plan to become a god. He said, but it's hard to say about the future. For now, either the Forsake Empire will quickly fall, or George III will give up on becoming a god, otherwise, the war might continue for some time. And if this war continues, anything could happen. Alger commented, the current situation is becoming increasingly confusing. At the same time, he thought, I think so too. Precisely because it's an adjacent pathway to the Reader, the Church doesn't want to see itself helping Adam fulfill his plan. Justice Audrey, who knew some inside information, connected this to Intis's strange silence in this war and felt vaguely worried. This was also Count Hall's concern. Logically speaking, it was normal for the Fenaport kingdom to remain silent for so long, as it was the weakest among the four nations in the North Continent, and it had been the same in previous large-scale wars, not easily declaring war or taking sides. But for the Intis Republic, the second strongest nation in the North Continent, to remain silent for so long, that was very strange. Hermit, Catalia also understood Emperor's meaning based on her knowledge of mysticism. She didn't discuss the current situation in the North Continent but brought up a long-standing question in her mind. According to some information I've obtained, almost all pathways have adjacent pathways. But only the monster pathway seems to have no adjacent pathways, which is a bit strange. Magician, Furs suddenly realized that through previous transactions with Hobert, they had learned about most of the adjacent pathways among the 22 pathways. Apprentice, Diviner, and Thief were adjacent pathways, Reader, Sailor, Erudite, Singer, and Secret Supplicant were adjacent pathways. There are also Warrior, Sleepless, and Corpse Collector as adjacent pathways. The remaining are all pairs of adjacent pathways, Lawyer, and Arbitrator, Hunter, and Witch, Prisoner, and Criminal, Erudite, and Seer. Furs hadn't noticed before that indeed only one pathway was left among the 22 pathways, and it was the monster pathway, which they had rarely mentioned before, seemingly only briefly brought up when trading information about the Angel King Ouroboros. At this point, almost all the other members understood what the Hermit meant. All pathways have adjacent pathways, so it's inherently strange for one pathway to suddenly have no adjacent pathways. Hobert smiled. Has everyone considered a question? Many non-adjacent pathways also have some similar abilities. For example, a witch's frost attack is very similar to the frost attack of the prisoner pathway. And a lawyer's charm is very similar to a witch's charm. Also, a hunter's fireball and a criminal pathway's fireball, there are many such examples. This reminded Klein of a theory that Iceberg Vice Admiral Edwina had mentioned in Grossel's travels. Since the topic had come to this, he shared his conversation with Iceberg Vice Admiral at that time. I heard something like this a long time ago. Some extraordinary creatures once tried to collect the extraordinary characteristic of a single element. For example, as Emperor said, the frost abilities of the witch and prisoner pathways. At that time, extraordinary characteristic didn't seem as stable as they are now. It would be more accurate to call them extraordinary elements. In short, those extraordinary creatures did their best to collect frost-type extraordinary elements. Their abilities didn't become stronger, instead, they became more prone to losing control. Klein speculated, this makes me think of an idea. What if our current extraordinary characteristic were initially pure extraordinary elements? Through the random devour of extraordinary creatures, these extraordinary elements intermingled, forming the initial extraordinary characteristic. In the second epoch, through repeated pulverization and reorganization by the old gods, extraordinary elements presented a state that could make creatures more stable after consumption. Until the blasphemy slate appeared, these combinations became fully formulaic, and thus we have the current extraordinary characteristic. Everyone first felt a sense of profound history, and then they felt that the world's idea made a lot of sense. Catalya thought, theoretically, extraordinary characteristics should have an initial state, where their abilities would be relatively singular. For example, the seer pathway would only perform mystical reappearance, and the apprentice would only shuttle through the spirit world. Under some coincidental circumstances, extraordinary creatures discovered that extraordinary elements with distortion characteristics could be balanced to a certain extent, and thus gradually developed into the current extraordinary characteristic. Other members had similar thoughts, all feeling that the formation process of extraordinary characteristic was a process of resisting the distortion characteristics of extraordinary abilities. That's exactly what I wanted to say, Hobert said. This should also involve the issue of extraordinary characteristic becoming increasingly warm. The owner of each extraordinary characteristic should have left a trace of mental residue within the characteristic. This made the originally very cold extraordinary characteristic, which was unsuitable for creatures to consume, gradually resonate with creatures and provide an opportunity for mutual fusion. The other members realized that the opportunity, Emperor, spoke of might be the acting method. Hobert continued, I wonder if everyone remembers the issue of divinity that we discussed before. In my opinion, divinity is similar to the consciousness of the universe, which are cold, abstract products for living beings. The extraordinary characteristic derived from these products are, of course, also distorted and cold for living beings. But in my opinion, after being warmed by generations of mental residue, these extraordinary characteristics should be much softer than they were at the very beginning. He paused and then said, even if there was a process of extraordinary elements merging with each other a long time ago, the main authority of a pathway, which is the uniqueness, will not change. So the extraordinary is still distorted for living beings, still difficult to tame. After learning these speculations, let's look at the monster pathway. Perhaps it doesn't have no adjacent pathways, instead, its adjacent pathways were dispersed into other pathways. Hobert smiled and said, this is my guess, and there's no evidence for it yet, but as far as I know, when a sleepless becomes a demigod, he gains the ability of darkness, which temporarily changes the target's fate, making them extremely unlucky. Also, as we discussed before, Amon's ability to steal fate, it's hard to say if he could steal a target's fate without the corresponding authority of a similar fate pathway. Silence fell in the hall for a few seconds as everyone digested the words of the Emperor. Alger was the first to speak. That's very possible, because the main extraordinary characteristic are dispersed, and the corresponding authority are also scattered, so the corresponding uniqueness is also diluted. Or, because there are no meander of that pathway, does the uniqueness of that pathway return to the state of cosmic consciousness? The other members initially found the hanged man's guess very reasonable, and then they one by one realized that what they were currently discussing was the most core content of the meander world. Moreover, such a discussion seemed to have little reference material and was very difficult to verify. It was like a physics student who had been studying diligently, and when he finally made some conjectures about the universe, he found that there was no literature to refer to and no theory to corroborate his ideas. At this point, he belatedly realized that his thoughts were already at the forefront of physics. Hobert then said, "There's another possibility, which is that the adjacent pathway of the fate pathway is not in the real world." Everyone was stunned again. At this point in the discussion, most members could no longer keep up with Hobert's thinking and had to work hard to understand his meaning. Only Klein, Alger, and Catalia could still keep up with Hobert's thoughts, mainly because they were discussing with Hobert. Upon hearing Hobert's new point of view, Catalia asked, "Not in the real world, then in the spirit world?" "Perhaps in the spirit world." At present, Hobert did not intend to bring up the matter of initially tearing apart the extraordinary characteristic of the outer gods, so he did not give a specific explanation, perhaps in other places. Catalia chewed on Hobert's answer, other places. At this moment, the world, who was sitting at the lower end, suddenly said, for example, the starry sky. Catalia immediately thought of the outer gods, but due to a lack of crucial information, her guesses stopped there. Hobert suddenly clapped his hands. "I suggest we only discuss this issue up to this point. We can continue the discussion when we have further clues." Everyone slowly nodded. Indeed, without enough clues, the discussion could not continue. However, the previous discussion was enough for everyone to ponder. At least it basically clarified the characteristics of extraordinary characteristic. After taking more than 10 seconds to digest the content of the discussion, the members of the Tarot Club all looked at the son, Derek. In the last Tarot Club meeting, Derek's exploration team had already reached the afternoon town camp and planned to rest for a day before exploring the giant court, so by now, their exploration should have concluded. Derek sat up straight and consciously said, "We completed the first exploration of the giant court, with 3 deaths, 1 missing person, and 5 survivors. We first arrived at the main gate of the royal court and saw 2 Silver Knight guarding it, in an unknown state." He thoughtfully explained, Silver Knight is the name for sequence 3 of the giant pathway. Everyone was stunned for a moment before connecting that the giant pathway was the warrior pathway. The Moon, Emlyn, Audrey, and several other members all inwardly expressed similar sentiments. As expected of the giant court, the god kingdom of an ancient deity, to have 2 sequence 3 demigods guarding the main gate. Only Hobert thought to himself, what a waste. This made him think that among the military Beander he had cultivated, many Beander of the warrior pathway had already advanced to sequence 7. Should he find an opportunity to obtain these 2 extraordinary characteristic of the Silver Knight? At this moment, Derek continued, following a hidden passage provided by Mr. World, we bypassed to the back of the giant court, encountering many monsters, primarily Wraith, along the way. Klein, who had watched the live broadcast, with true sight at the time, sighed, "Little son is really not a storyteller." The battles that occurred along the way were very exciting, allowing Klein to witness the seamless cooperation of the Silver City exploration team, which was rarely seen elsewhere. After reaching the decaying forest, we attempted an exploration, Derek said. We soon discovered that the Giant King's residual will combined with the power of the God Kingdom had formed a malevolent spirit. It was guarding the mausoleum of its parents. This made Audrey and Leonard both recall their previous exploration of Grossel's travels with the world. According to the Giant Guard, the Giant King didn't even allow his queen or children to approach the decaying forest. Derek paused here, unconsciously recalling the scene he had witnessed before continuing. After purifying that malevolent spirit, we arrived before the mausoleum of the Giant King's parents. There was a stone tablet indicating the identity of the tomb's occupants, and the tomb and coffins had already been opened. Inside were 2 human skeletons. Upon hearing this, Catalia's first reaction was that the 2 skeletons had other identities, godfather and godmother. No, there was no religion back then. Immediately after, she recalled some questions that the queen had thought of, inspired by Emperor Rosel's life. Why did even ancient texts and historical records refer to giants, elf, and vampires as humanoid or human-like creatures? Why weren't humans referred to as human-like giants, human-like elf, or human-like vampires? Catalia then thought of the Emperor's previous explanation of the humanoid creature faction in the Second Epic. She remembered that there was a key point that the Emperor had not explained at the time, only saying that he would explain it once he had evidence. She suspected that the Emperor already had some suspicions about this at that time. Alger, on the other hand, immediately suspected that someone had faked the scene, but then he thought that it wasn't as simple as just taking away the real bones and replacing them with human bones. They would also have to prepare suitable coffins to make the tomb's specifications not appear to belong to a giant, and crucially, such a forgery would have no practical significance and would not have much impact on reality. This made Alger feel that no one would do something so boring. Finally, he ran a hand through his hair and thought of his father, who was a hybrid of elf and human. With this thought, Alger was the first to accept the fact. At this moment, Emlyn was the most surprised member, his mind filled with thoughts of, impossible, and, this is impossible. If the ancestor of the giant was human, what about the blood ancestor? Are we just monsters created by the mutation of extraordinary characteristic? Emlyn denied it again inwardly. Impossible. We were clearly created by the ancestor himself. He has the authority of life and creation, completely different from savage deities like the giant king and elf king who only know how to fight. But his intuition, his rationality, and his brain all told him that the sun had no motive to lie about this matter. This reminds me of a previous guess about the second epic, Hobert said. The sun's description provides crucial evidence for that guess. Catalya. Indeed. The other members, also drawn in by Hobert's words, turned their attention to the Emperor's direction, having recovered from their initial surprise. Hobert said solemnly, "Do you all remember the humanoid creature faction and non-human creature faction we mentioned when discussing the factions of the ancient deities in the second epic? At that time, I questioned the names of these two factions and made two conjectures. The first conjecture was that all currently preserved information about the second epic was written by humans, and thus the factions were distinguished from a human perspective. Everyone recalled the transaction at that time, and also recalled the second conjecture that the Emperor had not explained at the time. Combining it with the sun's description, everyone seemed to immediately understand why the Emperor had been reserved at that time. Because that conjecture, without evidence, was indeed too shocking." Hobert continued, "My second conjecture is that the giant king, elf king, and blood ancestor all clearly knew that their respective races were derived from humans. Therefore, they all acknowledged the name, humanoid creature faction." "Why?" Emlyn asked somewhat excitedly. "Mr. Emperor, why would this be?" I mean humans would evolve into giants, elf, blood ancestor." Hobert was not as serious now as he had been just a moment ago. "We just discussed this question." Emlyn's face was ashen, because of extraordinary characteristic. "That's right, extraordinary characteristic." Hobert said, "Extraordinary characteristic are not friendly to any living creature. Their appearance caused a part of humanity to undergo drastic mutations in a short period of time." He then explained, "This also explains why the giant king and his kin did not accept demon monarch Fabuti into their faction, because in their view, demons were not creatures derived from humans." Catalya sighed. "Many questions now make sense." Klein thought of another question and, manipulating the world, asked, "So, humans existed before extraordinary characteristic? And extraordinary characteristic seemed to have appeared suddenly?" Hobert smiled and said, "I don't know." He thought to himself, "The stack of diaries you just put away should contain relevant clues." This topic once again caused all members to ponder for more than 10 seconds, and Derek also calmed himself down before continuing. "After leaving the decaying forest, we entered the interior of the giant court through the barren tunnel. Residual powers of fallen and concealment lingered along the way, requiring correct responses to pass through. The murals within that palace contained the power of fate cycle. We were affected by it, transforming into attendees of a gathering, repeating a process." He said solemnly, "That was the process of the Rose Redemption's establishment." For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.